The crutch hit the linoleum with a crack like a gunshot. Daniel's body followed half a second later, his prosthetic leg twisting awkwardly as two teenagers in designer jackets laughed so hard one of them had to steady himself against the booth. The morning crowd at Riley's diner went silent. Phones stayed in pockets, eyes dropped to plates. A disabled Marine lay sprawled on the floor of a public restaurant while two boys with trust funds treated him like a punchline, and nobody, not one person, moved to help. Nobody except the woman in the corner booth whose coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She wore scrubs that hadn't seen a washing machine in 2 days, her hospital badge still clipped crooked to her collar. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she was about to make the kind of decision that destroys careers and changes lives. She stood up. The room held its breath, and one of the boys made the fatal mistake of reaching for her wrist. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to invite you to stay with this story until the very end. Like, comment, and tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this truth has traveled. Sarah Mitchell had been awake for 31 hours straight when she walked into Riley's diner that Tuesday morning. The fluorescent lights felt like knives behind her eyes, and the smell of burnt coffee mingled with disinfectant that had somehow followed her from Graymont Memorial Hospital across 3 miles of October wind. Her shift at the ICU had been the kind that left handprints on your soul. 2 coding patients, 1 family screaming at her about insurance coverage while their father died 6 feet away, and a resident so green he'd nearly contaminated a central line. Sarah had held it together with the same iron discipline that got her through Helmand Province, through the convoy attack that killed 3 of her unit, through the medical discharge that ended her Army career at 26. She slid into the last booth by the window, the one with duct tape holding the vinyl together, and ordered coffee she wouldn't taste and toast she wouldn't eat. The diner hummed with the usual morning traffic. Construction workers gulping down eggs before the job site opened. A handful of office people checking phones, an elderly couple sharing a newspaper like they'd done it every Tuesday for 40 years. Normal, safe, forgettable. Daniel Brooks came in 9 minutes later. Sarah noticed him immediately, the way you notice anything that moves with that particular careful rhythm. He was maybe 30, black, with shoulders that still carried military posture even as he maneuvered through the narrow aisle between tables. The crutches were military-issue aluminum, worn smooth at the grips. His right pant leg was pinned up just below the knee, clean amputation, probably above knee based on the way he distributed his weight. He wore a faded USMC shirt that had been washed so many times the eagle, globe, and anchor had nearly dissolved into gray. His face carried the kind of quiet exhaustion Sarah saw in her own mirror, the look of someone who'd learned that asking for help costs more than struggling alone. He made it to the counter without incident, ordered coffee and oatmeal, paid with exact change counted out slowly from a worn wallet. The counterman, Mike, Sarah thought his name was, gave him a nod that might have been respect or might have been pity. Daniel turned to find a seat, scanning the room with the situational awareness that never quite leaves you after combat, looking for the path of least resistance, the table where he wouldn't have to squeeze past anyone or apologize for taking up space. That's when the 2 boys walked in. They entered like they owned the air itself, 18 or 19 years old, wearing the kind of casual wealth that costs more than Sarah's monthly rent. The taller one had blonde hair styled with product that probably had a French name, a Burberry jacket hanging open over a Princeton hoodie. His companion was darker-haired, shorter, with a Rolex that caught the light every time he gestured. They were loud in the way only the truly insulated can be, their laughter aggressive and performative, seeking an audience. Sarah watched them scan the diner with the predatory assessment of bored rich kids looking for entertainment. Their eyes passed over the construction workers. Too rough. The elderly couple. Too pathetic. The office workers. Too busy. Then they landed on Daniel, still standing in the middle of the aisle, trying to navigate around a waitress balancing 3 plates. The blonde one elbowed his friend, smirked. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Excuse me," Daniel said quietly, trying to angle past the waitress. The boys positioned themselves directly in his path, casual, like they'd just happened to stop there, like it was an accident. "Oh, sorry, man," the blonde one said, not moving. "Didn't see you there." His friend snickered. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. If you could just... What happened to your leg? The dark-haired one asked, loud enough that conversation stopped. Skateboarding accident? Yeah, must have been gnarly, the blonde added, eyes glittering with malice. Did you forget to wear your helmet? The diner had gone quieter now, that awful silence of witnesses who don't want to get involved. The waitress squeezed past with her plates, eyes down. Daniel stood there, balanced on his crutches, face carefully neutral in a way that Sarah recognized instantly. The expression of someone who'd had this conversation too many times, who knew that engaging would only make it worse, who was calculating whether he could get past them without incident. Move aside, Daniel said, his voice flat. We're just asking a question, the blonde one said, spreading his hands in mock innocence. It's a free country, right? You fought for that, didn't you? Freedom of speech? Leave him alone, someone muttered from a corner table, but they didn't stand up, didn't move. Or what? The dark-haired one shot back, spinning toward the voice. You gonna do something about it, old man? The elderly man looked away. Daniel tried to step around them. The blonde boy shifted his position again, blocking him. It was a dance now, deliberate cruelty disguised as coincidence. Every time Daniel moved, they moved. Every time he tried to go left, they drifted left. Right, they drifted right. All while maintaining expressions of innocent confusion, like they couldn't understand why this was a problem. Maybe you should call an Uber, the dark-haired one suggested. Probably safer than trying to walk. His friend burst out laughing, the kind of laugh that's designed to humiliate. Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She'd seen this before, in different contexts, different countries. The specific dynamic of power being exercised for its own sake. The particular pleasure some people take in demonstrating that they can hurt someone with complete impunity. In Helmand, it had been Taliban fighters taunting prisoners. In the ICU, it was insurance reps denying coverage while maintaining plausible deniability. Same mechanism, different uniform. Daniel's face had gone carefully blank, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckle grip on his crutches. He was one wrong move from either exploding or breaking, and these kids knew it. They were counting on it, counting on him either making a scene, which would let them play the victim, or absorbing the humiliation in silence, which would let them enjoy the show. I need to get past, Daniel said, and there was a thread of steel in his voice now, the kind that comes from giving an order you know won't be followed but has to be given anyway. So get past, the blonde one said, not moving an inch. That's when Daniel tried to force his way through the gap between them. It happened fast. The blonde boy stepped backward as if startled, bumped into Daniel's shoulder just hard enough to throw off his balance. On two legs, it would have been nothing. On one leg and two crutches, it was everything. Daniel's prosthetic twisted, his weight shifted wrong, and he went down hard, crutches clattering across the floor, his shoulder slamming into the edge of a table before he hit the linoleum. The sound of his body hitting the ground silenced every conversation in the diner. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the two boys started laughing. Not polite snickers or nervous giggles, full, theatrical laughter, doubled over, slapping each other's shoulders. The dark-haired one pulled out his phone, started recording. Oh my God, did you see that? Dude just fell over. Should we call Life Alert? The blonde one gasped between laughs. Help! I've fallen and I can't get up. They were performing now, playing to an audience that mostly looked away. A few people pulled out their phones, but Sarah couldn't tell if they were recording the harassment or just pretending to be busy. The elderly woman had tears in her eyes, but didn't stand. The construction workers stared at their plates. Mike the counterman reached for the phone, probably to call the police, but moved with the slow reluctance of someone who knew the cops wouldn't arrive in time to matter. Daniel lay on his side, one hand pressed against his ribs, the other reaching for his crutches. His face had gone red, not with pain, but with the deep, burning humiliation of being made helpless in public, of being reduced to a spectacle for the entertainment of children. Sarah had been trained for a lot of things. Trauma medicine under fire, triage with limited resources, keeping your head when everything around you was screaming chaos. But nobody had trained her for this specific moment, for the precise calculation of when staying silent makes you complicit when the professional thing to do is the wrong thing to do. She stood up. The movement was quiet, controlled, But in the sudden stillness of the diner, it felt loud. Every eye that had been carefully looking elsewhere suddenly focused on her. The scrubs marked her immediately. Medical, probably just off shift, not a threat. The boys glanced at her and dismissed her in the same moment. 200 pounds of teenage boy looking at a 120-pound woman who'd been awake for a day and a half. Sarah walked toward Daniel with the same steady pace she used approaching a patient in crisis. No rushing, no hesitation. She knelt beside him, her joints protesting, and met his eyes. Up close, she could see the shame there, raw and bleeding, worse than any physical injury. "Are you hurt?" she asked quietly, her voice pitched for him alone. Daniel shook his head, not trusting his voice. "Anything broken? Ribs, wrist, collarbone?" "No," he managed. Just embarrassed." "Nothing to be embarrassed about," Sarah said, and meant it. She retrieved his crutches, checked them quickly for damage, handed them back. "Oh, how sweet," the blond boy drawled from above them. "Are you his nurse? Does he need his diaper changed too?" Sarah stood up, slowly. When she turned to face them, something in her posture had changed. Not aggressive exactly, but different. The boys were too stupid or too entitled to recognize it, but Sarah knew what she looked like. She'd seen it in reflections during firefights, in windows when carrying wounded, in mirrors after bad shifts. She looked like someone who'd run out of patience for bullshit. "You need to leave," she said. No heat in her voice, no anger, just flat statement of fact. The dark-haired one laughed. "Or what? You gonna fight us? 2-on-1? How's that fair?" "Last chance," Sarah said. "Walk away now." "Yeah?" The blonde one stepped closer, invading her space using his height advantage. "What are you gonna do about it, lady? You look like you can barely stand up." He was right about that part. Sarah's legs ached, her back screamed, every muscle felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. She'd been awake for 31 hours. She'd used up every reserve getting through her shift. But 31 hours awake is nothing compared to 3 deployments. And tired doesn't mean helpless. The blond boy made his mistake then. He reached out and grabbed Sarah's wrist, not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to control, to establish dominance, to remind her that he was bigger and stronger and she should know her place. The grab lasted exactly 1.5 seconds. Sarah moved with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been drilled in combat maneuvers until they became muscle memory, until thinking about them would actually slow you down. She rotated her wrist against his thumb, the weakest point of his grip, broke free with almost no effort. His brain was still processing the surprise when her other hand locked onto his wrist and she stepped backward, pulling him off balance, using his own forward momentum against him. Basic combatives. Level 1, straight from the Army Field Manual. She'd taught this throw to privates fresh out of basic. She could do it asleep. The boy hit the floor on his knees, his arm twisted at an angle that stressed his shoulder joint without quite dislocating it. His face went from smug to shocked to scared in about 2 seconds. His friend rushed her. Sarah saw him coming in her peripheral vision, didn't even turn her head. He was telegraphing the move, shoulders squared, hands out like he was going to shove her. Sloppy. Emotional. Amateur. She waited until he was committed, until his weight was all moving forward. Then she stepped inside his reach and drove her shoulder into his armpit while her hands locked onto his jacket. Basic hip throw, using his momentum to complete the arc. He went up and over, landed on his back hard enough that she heard the air explode out of his lungs. The entire sequence took maybe 8 seconds. 2 boys down, 1 nurse standing between them and the Marine on the floor. The diner had gone absolutely silent. Sarah stepped back, putting space between herself and both boys, hands at her sides but weight balanced, ready. Neither boy moved to get up. The blonde one was staring at her with something that might have been fear or might have been rage. Hard to tell with 18-year-olds. The dark-haired one was gasping, trying to remember how breathing worked. "You," the blonde one started, but Sarah cut him off. "Don't." Just the one word, but it carried enough weight that he shut his mouth. Someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined in. Not everyone. Some people still looked away, uncomfortable with the violence even if it had been defensive. But enough. Enough that Sarah felt her face flush, felt the adrenaline crash starting to hit her system. Mike the counterman was on the phone now, talking fast. "Police." Sarah's stomach dropped. She looked down at the 2 boys, at her hands. at Daniel, who was staring at her like he wasn't sure what he'd just witnessed. This was bad. This was very, very bad. She'd just assaulted two civilians in a public place. Didn't matter that they'd harassed a disabled veteran. Didn't matter that one had grabbed her first. She'd put hands on them, taken them down hard, and about 15 people had watched her do it. The blonde boy seemed to realize this at the same moment. His expression shifted from shock to calculation. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, started recording. "You attacked us," he said, his voice pitched loud for the recording. "Unprovoked. You assaulted us." "That's not—" Someone started to object, but the boy spoke over them. "We were just standing here, and this crazy woman attacked us. I'm injured. Look at my shoulder." The dark-haired one caught on, scrambled to his feet, clutching his ribs. "She's insane. We didn't do anything." Sarah stood there, too tired to argue, watching her career circle the drain. In the ICU, she'd learned that some patients lie with complete conviction, that reality is subjective when money and power get involved, that the truth matters less than the story. Daniel struggled to his feet, propped himself on his crutches. "She didn't attack anyone. You grabbed her first. I saw it." "You're a homeless veteran," the blonde boy sneered. "Nobody's going to believe you." "I'm not homeless." "Might as well be. Look at you." Sarah felt Daniel flinch beside her, and something in her chest went cold and hard. She'd been ready to accept consequences for her actions. But watching these entitled kids try to destroy a man who'd given everything for a country that couldn't be bothered to protect him in a diner, that was something else. "I have video," someone called out. An older woman, probably 60, holding up her phone with a shaking hand. "I recorded the whole thing. They knocked him down. They grabbed her first." "Delete that," the blonde boy snapped. "No," the woman said, and there was steel in her voice that reminded Sarah of her grandmother. "I don't think I will." The dark-haired boy pulled out his own phone, started making a call. "Dad, yeah, we need you at Riley's diner right now. Some psycho attacked us." "No, we're fine, but we need—" "Yeah. Okay, we'll wait." Sarah's stomach twisted. "Dad, of course. These kids had money, which meant lawyers, which meant power. She'd broken the first rule of surviving as a working-class person in America. She'd put her hands on rich people's children. The police arrived in 6 minutes. 2 officers, both male, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. They walked in, assessed the scene with practiced eyes. 2 teenage boys with minor injuries, 1 exhausted woman in scrubs, 1 disabled veteran, and a diner full of witnesses who all had different stories depending on who was asking. "All right," the older cop said, his voice carrying the weary authority of someone who'd done this too many times. "Who wants to tell me what happened?" Everyone started talking at once. The blonde boy spoke loudest, most insistent, painting a picture of unprovoked violence, of a crazy woman attacking innocent customers. His friend nodded along, adding details, building the narrative. Daniel tried to interject, to explain, but the younger cop cut him off. "Sir, I need you to step back. I'm a witness. Step back, sir." The older woman with the video tried to show her phone. "Officer, I have footage." "Ma'am, 1 moment, please." Sarah stood silent, watching the machinery of official response grind through its gears. She knew how this worked. The boys would give their statement. She'd give hers. Witnesses would be interviewed. The video might or might not be admissible, depending on how the cops felt about it. And somewhere in the background, lawyers would already be getting involved, shaping the narrative before the truth even had time to put on its shoes. The older cop turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, did you put hands on these young men?" "Yes." "In what capacity?" "They knocked him down," Sarah said, nodding toward Daniel. "They were harassing him. One of them grabbed my wrist. I defended myself." "She attacked us," the blonde boy shouted. "She's lying." The cop held up a hand. "Son, I'm going to need you to calm down." "Calm down? She assaulted us. We could have been killed." Sarah almost laughed at that, but managed to keep her face neutral. Killed by a woman who weighed maybe 120 soaking wet and could barely keep her eyes open. But she'd learned a long time ago that rich kids live in a different reality, one where any challenge to their authority feels like a mortal threat. That's when the door opened and Victor Hale walked in. Sarah didn't know his name yet, but she knew the type immediately. Mid-50s, silver hair styled with the same expensive precision as his son's, wearing a suit that cost more than Sarah made in 2 months. He had the look of a man used to being the most important person in any room, used to problems disappearing when he applied sufficient pressure. He scanned the diner with cold eyes, located his son, and his expression hardened into something ugly. "Dad?" the blond boy started. "Don't." Victor's voice cut like a blade. "Are you injured?" "My shoulder. Badly?" "No, but then stop whining." He turned to the officers and his entire demeanor changed, became almost friendly. "Gentlemen, Victor Hale. I believe my son and his friend were assaulted by this woman." The older cop's expression went carefully neutral. "Mr. Hale, we're still gathering information." "I'm sure you are. I'm also sure you have eyewitnesses, probable cause, and a clear case of assault. So I'm going to ask you, very politely, to arrest this woman before I have to make some uncomfortable phone calls." The threat was delivered with a smile, but Sarah watched the cop's jaw tighten. He knew what Victor meant. Phone calls to the chief, to the mayor, to whoever held the leash on the department budget. "Mr. Hale, we need to interview witnesses. You have witnesses." Victor gestured to his son. "You have victims. You have the perpetrator standing right there. What else do you need?" "He grabbed her first," Daniel said, his voice hard. "I saw it. She defended herself." Victor turned to him with the kind of withering look usually reserved for insects. "And you are?" "A witness. A homeless person." "I'm not. Do you have an address, a job, or do you spend your days panhandling and your nights in shelters?" Daniel's face went red. "I have an apartment." "Where?" "That's none of your—" "Exactly." Victor turned back to the cops. "So we have an unreliable witness with an obvious agenda. What else?" The older woman stepped forward. "I have video. It shows your boys knocked down this veteran and—" "Do you have permission to record on private property?" Victor asked smoothly. "Did you inform my son he was being recorded? Because if not, that recording might not be admissible, and you might be looking at wiretapping charges." The woman's face went pale. Sarah watched the whole thing unfold with a sick sort of fascination. This was power in action, raw and undisguised. Victor Hale wasn't arguing facts or truth. He was demonstrating control, showing everyone in the room that he could bend reality to his will through sheer force of money and influence. The older cop looked at Sarah with something that might have been sympathy or might have been resignation. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us to answer some questions." "Are you arresting her?" Daniel demanded. "We're detaining her pending investigation." "Based on what? The word of 2 bullies and their rich daddy?" "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back or I'll detain you for obstruction." Sarah put a hand on Daniel's arm, felt him trembling with rage or frustration or both. "It's okay," she said quietly. "It's not okay. This is bullshit." "I know, but fighting them here won't help." The younger cop moved forward with handcuffs, and Sarah felt the last piece of her dignity crumble. She'd been awake for 31 hours, had fought to save lives in an understaffed ICU, had defended a disabled veteran from harassment, and now she was going to be arrested in front of a diner full of people while the actual aggressors smirked from behind their father's money. "This is wrong," someone muttered. "Someone should do something," another voice added. But nobody did. Nobody ever did. That was the lesson Sarah had learned in Helmand, in the ICU, and now here in Riley's diner on a Tuesday morning that had started with just wanting coffee. The world was full of people who knew what was right and stood by while the opposite happened, who confused witnessing with action. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Victor Hale pulled out his phone, made a call. "Martin? Victor? I need you at the courthouse in an hour. Assault case. The perpetrator is being taken in now." He paused. "Doesn't matter. Make it go away. Whatever it costs." Sarah closed her eyes. Whatever it costs. That was the difference between her and Victor Hale in 4 words. She had limits. He didn't. As the cops led her toward the door, she caught Daniel's eye one last time. He looked destroyed, not by the fall or the harassment, but by the helplessness of watching someone who'd tried to protect him get crushed by a system neither of them could fight. "I'll testify," he called after her. I'll tell them what really happened. Victor Hale laughed. You'll tell them what you think happened, and then my lawyers will tear you apart on cross-examination. They'll ask about your medical history, your psychiatric evaluations, your medication. They'll make you look so unreliable that nothing you say will matter. I'm a Marine. You're a disabled man with PTSD who probably can't afford a good lawyer. Know your place. The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah twisted in the cop's grip, looked back at Victor Hale with the same flat assessment she'd used to evaluate a trauma patient. You know what the saddest part is? She said. Your son was probably a decent kid once, before you taught him that money means he doesn't have to be. Victor's smile didn't waver. And you were probably a decent soldier once, before you decided assault was an acceptable response to words. The cops pulled her toward the door. The last thing Sarah saw before they led her outside was Daniel, standing alone in the middle of the diner, surrounded by people who'd watched him fall and done nothing, staring at the crutches in his hands like he'd forgotten what they were for. The squad car was parked in a loading zone, engine running. Sarah had ridden in plenty of vehicles during her service, but climbing into the back of a police cruiser felt different. The door shut with a heavy thunk that sounded like finality. Through the window she could see the diner. Victor Hale had an arm around his son's shoulders, talking to him in low tones. Teaching him, Sarah realized. This whole thing was a lesson. How to weaponize money, how to turn being the aggressor into being the victim, how to destroy someone without ever having to account for it. The younger cop got in the driver's seat, the older one in passenger. Neither spoke to her. They probably saw a dozen situations like this every week, people with no power getting crushed by people with all of it, and learned a long time ago that caring about it would destroy them. The radio crackled, dispatch calling another unit to a domestic disturbance. The engine rumbled to life, and Sarah Mitchell, decorated combat medic, ICU nurse, woman who'd spent 31 hours saving lives, was driven away in handcuffs while the boys who'd knocked down a disabled veteran for entertainment went home to play video games and forget it ever happened. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because what Victor Hale didn't know, what his lawyers and his money and his influence couldn't prepare him for, was that some people fight back. Some people have brothers and sisters who don't forget. Some debts come due no matter how much power you think you have. The squad car turned a corner and Riley's diner disappeared from view. In the back seat, exhausted and handcuffed, Sarah closed her eyes and did what she'd learned to do in every impossible situation the last 10 years had thrown at her. She waited. Because wars aren't won in single battles, and sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who end up changing everything. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Sarah sat on the metal bench with her back against concrete blocks that had been painted institutional beige sometime in the previous century, watching the fluorescent lights flicker in a rhythm that matched her headache. They'd processed her an hour ago, fingerprints, mugshot, personal effects logged into a manila envelope that would probably end up in a landfill when this was all over. The booking officer had been professionally detached, going through the motions with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd stopped seeing people and only saw cases. She'd asked for her phone call. They'd told her to wait. So she waited. Across the corridor, a drunk was singing something that might have been a country song or might have been a cry for help. 2 cells down, a woman was arguing with someone who wasn't there. The sounds echoed off concrete and steel, creating a symphony of human misery that Sarah had heard variations of in field hospitals and trauma wards, places where people ended up when everything else had failed them. The door at the end of the corridor buzzed and swung open. A detective walked through, mid-40s, black woman with gray threading through her braids and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything anymore. She carried a folder and a styrofoam cup of what smelled like actual coffee, not the burnt sludge from the precinct pot. Sarah Mitchell? She stopped in front of the cell. That's me. Detective Angela Morrison. I'm assigned to your case. She unlocked the cell door but didn't open it yet. You want to tell me what happened at Riley's diner this morning? Sarah met her eyes, trying to read the angle. Cops had agendas, same as everyone else. Some wanted truth, some wanted clearance rates, some just wanted to get through their shift without paperwork. Morrison's face gave nothing away. I defended myself and a disabled veteran from harassment. Victor Hale's son says you attacked him unprovoked. Victor Hale's son is lying. Morrison opened the cell door, gestured for Sarah to follow. They walked down the corridor past the other cells, through another locked door, into an interrogation room that looked exactly like every interrogation room Sarah had seen in movies and TV shows: scarred table, uncomfortable chairs, mirror that was definitely one-way glass, camera in the corner with a blinking red light. Morrison set down the folder and the coffee. "Sit." Sarah sat. Morrison took the chair across from her, opened the folder, and pulled out a stack of photographs. Crime scene photos, Sarah realized. The diner from multiple angles. The floor where Daniel had fallen, close-ups of the two boys showing minor bruising, reddened skin, nothing serious. "You did this?" Morrison tapped one of the photos showing the dark-haired boy's swollen wrist. "I defended myself after he rushed me." "You're a nurse?" "ICU nurse at Graymont Memorial. Just finished a 30-hour shift before this happened." Morrison made a note. "That's a long shift." "We're understaffed. Story of American healthcare." "You tired?" "Exhausted." "Tired enough to misjudge a situation? Maybe overreact?" Sarah felt the trap closing but kept her voice steady. "I was tired enough to want coffee and nothing else. But I wasn't so tired that I imagined watching two teenagers knock a one-legged Marine to the floor for entertainment." Morrison pulled out another photo. This one showed Sarah mid-throw, the blonde boy's face twisted in surprise and pain. Someone in the diner had captured it with their phone, the image grainy but unmistakable. "This look like self-defense to you?" Morrison asked. "It looks like basic Army combatives applied to someone who grabbed me first. Check the security footage. You'll see him reach for my wrist." "I did check the footage. It's grainy and the angle's bad. Could argue either way. He reached for you or you reached for him." "Then check with the witnesses. Multiple people saw what happened." Morrison leaned back, studying Sarah with the kind of attention that made her skin prickle. "I did talk to witnesses. Got 6 different versions of events. The elderly couple says the boys knocked down the veteran. The construction workers say there was an altercation, but they didn't see who started it. The office workers were on their phones. The counterman was in the back. And Victor Hale's son has a very convincing story about being attacked by a strange woman." "What about Daniel Brooks, the Marine they harassed?" "Mr. Brooks gave a statement. Says you defended him after the boys knocked him down." Morrison paused. "He also has a history of PTSD, 2 psychiatric holds in the last 3 years, and currently receives disability payments for mental health issues." Sarah's stomach dropped. "So you're going to ignore him because he's damaged?" "I'm going to weigh his testimony against other evidence. That's my job. Your job is to find the truth. My job is to build a prosecutable case. Truth and prosecution don't always overlap." Morrison pulled out another document, slid it across the table. "This is a statement from Victor Hale's attorney. They're prepared to press full charges, assault and battery, possibly elevated to assault with intent given your military background. They're also considering a civil suit for emotional damages, medical expenses, and pain and suffering." Sarah scanned the document, her exhaustion making the words blur together. "Emotional damages. For 2 boys who spent 10 minutes torturing a disabled veteran. Can you prove they tortured him? Because I've got 1 grainy security video, conflicting witness statements, and a very expensive lawyer who's already filed a motion to exclude your Mr. Brooks from testifying on competency grounds." "He's competent. He's a disabled veteran with documented mental health issues. A good defense attorney will tear him apart on cross-examination, make the jury doubt everything he says. You know how this works." Sarah did know. She'd seen it in the military, the way inconvenient truths got buried under procedure and paperwork, the way powerful people protected their own while everyone else got ground down by the machinery of official process. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. Morrison closed the folder. "That depends on you. Victor Hale's attorney has indicated they might be willing to consider a settlement. You plead to simple assault, suspended sentence, community service, no jail time. In exchange, they drop the civil suit and you walk away with a record, but your freedom. And if I refuse? Then we go to trial. You face 2 to 5 years if convicted, plus whatever damages the civil suit awards. You'll lose your nursing license, your career, everything you've worked for, all because you decided to play hero in a diner." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of choices and consequences. Sarah knew Morrison wasn't being cruel. She was being realistic. This was how the system worked when you had no money and no power. You got offered a deal that would ruin your life slightly less than the alternative, and you were supposed to be grateful for it. "I need to think," Sarah said. "Take your time, but not too much time. Hale's attorney wants an answer by end of business today, or the offer disappears." Morrison stood, knocked on the door. A uniformed officer opened it from outside. "Can I make my phone call now?" Sarah asked. "One call. Make it count." They led her to a payphone in the corridor that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Sarah picked up the receiver, her mind running through options. She didn't have money for a good lawyer. She didn't have family nearby. Her friends from the army were scattered across the country, and the ones she'd stayed close with were dealing with their own struggles: PTSD, unemployment, addiction, all the fun prizes you won for serving your country. She dialed the one number she'd memorized but hadn't called in 3 years. It rang 4 times. She was about to hang up when a voice answered. "This is Captain Jessica Chen." Sarah's throat tightened. "Jess? It's Sarah Mitchell." A pause, long enough that Sarah thought the line had gone dead. Then, "Sarah! Jesus, where are you?" "Detention center in Graymont City. I need help." "What happened?" Sarah gave her the short version: the diner, the harassment, the fight, the arrest. Jess listened without interrupting, a skill she'd perfected during their deployment when Sarah would brief her on casualty reports, and Jess would have to make decisions about medevac priority with incomplete information. When Sarah finished, Jess was quiet for a long moment. "You put hands on Victor Hale's kid?" "You know him?" "Everyone knows him. Real estate developer, owns half the commercial property in 3 counties, major political donor. His son's a piece of work. Got kicked out of 2 prep schools, but daddy's money made those problems disappear too." "So I'm screwed." "Probably, but maybe not." Another pause. "You still have your discharge papers, DD 214? "In my apartment. Why?" "Because you didn't just defend some random veteran. You defended a Marine as a former Army medic in a situation where you were clearly outnumbered. That's not assault. That's what we trained you to do." Sarah felt something flutter in her chest that might have been hope or might have been delusion. "Jess, I'm not in the military anymore. That training doesn't give me the right to. It gives you the right to defend yourself and others, and it establishes a pattern of behavior that's consistent with your service record. How many combat saves do you have documented?" 14 confirmed, maybe 20 total. "And how many commendations?" "I don't remember. 3 or 4. "It's 7. Including a Bronze Star with Valor. I know because I wrote 2 of the recommendations myself." Jess's voice had shifted into command mode, the tone she used when planning operations. "Listen to me carefully. Don't take the plea deal. Don't admit to anything. Tell them you want a public defender and you're invoking your right to remain silent. Then sit tight." "Jess, I can't afford to fight this." "You won't have to. I'm making some calls. There are people who owe you, Sarah. People who remember what you did over there. Let me see what I can do." "I don't want charity. This isn't charity. This is Marines taking care of their own. Army too, even if you guys are slow." A hint of the old humor crept into Jess's voice, the gallows comedy that got them through the bad days. "Just don't do anything stupid until you hear from me. Can you manage that?" Sarah almost laughed. "I'll try." "Good. I'll call you back within 6 hours. Keep your head down and remember, you're not the one who should be ashamed here." The line went dead. Sarah hung up the receiver and stood there for a moment, letting Jess's words settle into the exhausted spaces in her mind. She'd spent the last 3 years trying to leave the military behind, trying to build a civilian life, trying to convince herself that her service was just a chapter in her past and not the defining feature of her identity. But standing in a police station corridor, facing charges for defending someone who couldn't defend themselves, she felt the old training click back into place like muscle memory. The officer led her back to the holding cell. Morrison was waiting there, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. "Make your call?" the detective asked. "Yeah." "Got a lawyer?" "Working on it." Morrison's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "Victor Hale's attorney called while you were on the phone. They've sweetened the offer. Plea to disorderly conduct, no jail time, record gets expunged after a year of good behavior. All you have to do is apologize publicly and agree not to go within 100 yards of his son. Sarah met Morrison's eyes. Tell them no. You sure about that? This might be the best deal you get. I'm sure, Morrison shrugged. Your funeral. Arraignment scheduled for tomorrow morning. You'll be held overnight unless you can post bail. How much? Judge set it at $50,000. You need 10% cash to a bondsman. $5,000. Sarah had maybe $800 in her checking account and another $1,200 in savings that was supposed to be her emergency fund. She'd already burned through her emergency fund twice in the last year, once for car repairs, once for a root canal her insurance didn't cover. The math was simple and devastating. I can't make bail, Sarah said quietly. Morrison nodded like she'd expected this. Then you're a guest of the county until tomorrow. Try to get some sleep. You look like hell. The detective walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. The officer locked Sarah's cell door and followed, leaving her alone with the drunk's off-key singing and the woman's one-sided argument with ghosts. Sarah lay down on the metal bench, used her arm as a pillow, and closed her eyes. She'd slept in worse places. On the floor of a Humvee, in a fighting position outside Kandahar, in the supply closet at Graymont Memorial, during a particularly brutal shift when she couldn't make it home. This was just another challenge, another obstacle to endure. But as exhaustion dragged her down toward unconscious, she couldn't stop thinking about Daniel Brooks standing in that diner, watching her get arrested for defending him, listening to Victor Hale tell him to know his place. She wondered if he'd gone home, or if home was just a word for him now, something other people had. She wondered if he was safe, if those boys would find him again, if Hale's money would shield them from consequences forever. She wondered if she'd just destroyed her life for nothing. Sleep came anyway, pulling her under in fits and starts. Her dreams populated by faces she'd tried to forget. Soldiers she'd treated who didn't make it home. Patients who'd coded on her watch, all the people she couldn't save no matter how hard she fought. When she woke, the light coming through the narrow window had shifted. Evening, probably. Her body ached in new and creative ways, muscles stiff from the metal bench, head pounding from dehydration and stress. Someone had slid a tray under the cell door while she slept. Bologna sandwich on white bread, apple that looked like it had been in storage since the previous administration, carton of milk. She ate because her training said to eat when food was available, drank the milk because dehydration would make everything worse. The food tasted like cardboard and defeat. The corridor had gone quiet. The drunk had either sobered up or passed out. The woman with the imaginary arguments had been released or moved. Sarah was alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of the precinct. Phones ringing, voices raised, doors slamming, the mundane chaos of law enforcement grinding through another day. She was measuring time by the movement of shadows when the corridor door buzzed open and Morrison walked through again, this time accompanied by a man Sarah didn't recognize. Mid-30s, Asian, wearing a suit that looked expensive but not ostentatious, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen actual use. Morrison unlocked Sarah's cell. "You've got a visitor." The man stepped forward, offered his hand through the bars. "Miss Mitchell, my name is David Park. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates." He paused. "The firm, not the detective. Unfortunate coincidence." Sarah shook his hand, confused. "I didn't call a lawyer." "No, but Captain Jessica Chen called me. We served together in Afghanistan. She was my commanding officer during my JAG deployment. When she explained your situation, I told her I'd be happy to represent you. I can't afford pro bono. Consider it payback for the time Jess saved my life during a mortar attack." He smiled slightly. "Plus, I've been looking for a reason to go up against Victor Hale's legal team. They're arrogant, and they're sloppy, which makes them fun to beat." Morrison made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "I'll leave you two to talk. You've got 30 minutes. She walked away, and Park sat down on the bench across from Sarah's cell, pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. "First question," he said. "Did you assault those boys?" "I defended myself after one grabbed me and the other rushed me. I used appropriate force to neutralize the threat without causing serious injury." Park wrote something down. "You have military training?" "Army medic, 3 deployments, combat lifesaver certified, plus basic combatives training. Any documented use of force during your service? Sarah thought about Helmand, about the insurgent who tried to grab a wounded soldier during a medevac, about how she'd put him down with the butt of her rifle before he could pull the pin on his grenade, about the after-action report that called it a justified defensive action. Yes, all ruled justified. Park nodded. Good. That establishes competency and a pattern of appropriate response to threats. Second question, are there witnesses who can corroborate your version of events? Daniel Brooks, the Marine they harassed before they came at me. Multiple people in the diner saw what happened. Mr. Brooks has a psychiatric history. Hale's lawyers will use that to undermine his testimony. I know, Detective Morrison already told me. But they can't undermine everyone. Give me names of other witnesses. Sarah ran through the diner in her memory, trying to recall faces and details through the fog of exhaustion. Elderly couple in the corner booth, woman probably 60, had her phone out, said she recorded the whole thing. Construction workers at the counter, maybe 4 of them. Office workers by the window. The counterman, Mike, I think his name is. Park wrote it all down. The woman with the phone. That's our key. If she has footage showing the boys knocking down Mr. Brooks, showing them harassing him, showing one of them grabbing you first, then Hale's case falls apart. His lawyers threatened her with wiretapping charges. Empty threat, single-party consent state, and she was recording in a public space. They were trying to intimidate her into deleting the evidence. Park made another note. I'll subpoena the footage and interview her myself. What about the diner's security cameras? Morrison said the footage is grainy and the angle's bad. Bad for prosecution, maybe. Might be fine for defense. I'll get a copy and have it analyzed. He looked up from his legal pad, met Sarah's eyes. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you'll be arraigned. The prosecution will argue for high bail because of your military training and the severity of the alleged assault. I'll argue for release on your own recognizance based on your clean record, your employment history, and your ties to the community. Judge will probably split the difference and reduce bail to something manageable. I don't have money for bail. You won't need it. I've already arranged for a bail bond through a veterans fund. They cover first responders and military personnel facing legal issues related to defensive actions. You'll be out by tomorrow afternoon. Sarah felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes and blinked them away hard. She couldn't remember the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return, without making her feel like charity case, without strings attached. Why are you doing this? She asked. Park was quiet for a moment, and something moved behind his eyes. Memory, maybe, or pain, or the weight of old debts. Because Jess Chen pulled me out of a burning vehicle while insurgents were shooting at us. Because she held pressure on my femoral artery for 40 minutes until medevac arrived. Because without her I'd have bled out in the desert, and instead I got to come home, go to law school, build a life. He paused. When she calls and says someone needs help, I don't ask questions. I just show up. I'm not her. I'm just someone who made a stupid decision in a diner. You defended a disabled veteran from harassment and assault. That's not stupid. That's exactly what we trained you to do. Park stood, gathered his legal pad and briefcase. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we start fighting back. He knocked on the cell bars and Morrison appeared to let him out. Sarah watched him go, her mind spinning with the sudden shift from despair to something that looked almost like hope. The night passed slowly. Sarah dozed in fits and starts, her body demanding rest her mind refused to grant. She kept replaying the scene in the diner, looking for the moment where she could have made a different choice, could have walked away, could have avoided the cascade of consequences that had led to this cell. But every time she ran through the scenario, she hit the same wall. Walking away meant letting Daniel Brooks get humiliated without consequence, meant teaching 2 rich kids that they could hurt people for fun, meant being the kind of person who witnesses injustice and does nothing. She'd been that person once, early in her first deployment, when she'd watched a sergeant abuse a local interpreter and stayed silent because speaking up would have caused problems. The interpreter had quit 2 days later, and a week after that, their unit had walked into an ambush because nobody knew the local terrain well enough without him. 3 soldiers wounded, 1 killed. Sarah had worked on them all, had held pressure on wounds while calling for medevac, had done everything right except for the one thing that mattered, speaking up before it was too late. She'd promised herself after that she wouldn't be silent again. That promise had cost her a lot over the years. A promotion she didn't get because she reported a superior for negligence. A relationship that ended because she wouldn't ignore her partner's prescription drug problem. A comfortable job at a private clinic because she couldn't stomach billing patients for treatments they couldn't afford. And now it might cost her everything. But some prices were worth paying. Morning came with the sounds of the precinct waking up. Shift change, new prisoners being processed, the corridor door buzzing open and closed with rhythmic regularity. Someone brought Sarah a breakfast tray that was only marginally better than dinner. Powdered eggs, burnt toast, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with floor sweepings. She ate anyway. Drank the terrible coffee, prepared herself. At 9 o'clock, Morrison came to collect her. Arraignment time, try not to say anything stupid in front of the judge. They put her in handcuffs again, led her through the maze of corridors to a sally port where a transport van waited. 2 other defendants were already inside. A woman who looked like she'd been crying all night. A man who stared at nothing with the hollow eyes of someone who'd given up. The ride to the courthouse took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Sarah watched the city slide past through the van's narrow windows. People going to work, grabbing coffee, living their normal lives while she sat in chains, heading to court to answer for the crime of defending someone who couldn't defend himself. The courthouse was a concrete monument to bureaucratic authority, all harsh angles and narrow windows, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. They processed her through another security checkpoint, took her to a holding cell to wait her turn before the judge. Park found her there an hour later, looking fresh and professional in a different suit, carrying a briefcase full of documents. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I've been better. I've got some good news. The woman from the diner, her name is Margaret Chen, no relation to Jessica, agreed to testify and provide her video footage. I watched it last night. It's clear, well lit, and shows everything from the moment those boys walked in until the moment you were arrested." Sarah felt her chest loosen slightly. And it shows exactly what you said. The boys harassing Mr. Brooks, knocking him down, laughing about it. Shows one of them grabbing your wrist when you stood up. Shows you defending yourself with minimal force. It's textbook self-defense. So the charges will be dropped? Not yet. Hale's attorney is arguing that you used excessive force, that your military training makes you a deadly weapon, that you should have retreated rather than engaged. But with this footage and Mr. Brooks's testimony, we have a strong defense. The prosecution knows it too. A bailiff appeared at the cell door. "Mitchell, you're up." They led her into the courtroom, and Sarah felt the weight of it settle over her like a physical thing. The judge sat elevated behind his bench, 60-something with gray hair, and the expression of someone who'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. The prosecution table was occupied by a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. And at the defense table, Victor Hale sat with his son and an attorney who had the kind of tan you only get from regular golf games. Daniel Brooks sat in the gallery behind Park, wearing a clean shirt and his service ribbons, balanced on his crutches even while sitting. Seeing him there, looking scared but determined, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. The judge called the court to order. Case number 2024-CR-8847, State versus Sarah Mitchell. Charges of assault and battery. How does the defendant plead? Park stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The prosecution stood as well. "Your Honor, given the severity of the assault and the defendant's military training, we request remand without bail." "Ms. Mitchell has no prior criminal record," Park countered. "She's a decorated veteran and an ICU nurse with strong ties to the community. She poses no flight risk and no danger to the public. We request release on her own recognizance." The judge looked down at the file in front of him, then up at Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell, do you work at Graymont Memorial Hospital?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you currently employed?" Sarah hesitated, not knowing the answer. Park stepped in smoothly. "She's been suspended pending the outcome of this case, Your Honor, but she remains an employee in good standing." "Suspended for assaulting patients?" the prosecution asked with false sweetness. "Suspended as a precautionary measure," Park shot back. "Standard hospital policy during any legal proceeding involving staff." The judge held up a hand. "Enough. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence, including witness statements and security footage. This appears to be a legitimate dispute over facts, not an open and shut case. He looked at Sarah again. Bail is set at $5,000 cash or bond. Trial date to be set within 60 days. Ms. Mitchell, you are ordered to have no contact with the alleged victims or any witnesses aside from normal court proceedings. The gavel came down. Sarah exhaled slowly. Park had warned her the bail would be reduced, but hearing it still felt like a reprieve. Behind her, she heard Daniel make a small sound of relief. Victor Hale leaned over to his attorney, whispered something urgent. The attorney stood. Your Honor, we'd like to request a restraining order requiring Ms. Mitchell to stay at least 500 yards from our clients. On what grounds? The judge asked. On the grounds that she's demonstrated violent tendencies and poses a clear threat to their safety. Park didn't even wait for permission to respond. That's ridiculous, Your Honor. My client defended herself after being physically grabbed. She poses no threat to anyone unless they assault her first. The judge looked annoyed. Request denied. Standard no-contact order stands. Anything else? The prosecution conferred with Hale's attorney, then stood again. The state would like to request an expedited trial date, Your Honor. Given the clear evidence and the defendant's dangerous nature, we believe justice should be served quickly. 2 months is already expedited for this court's docket, the judge said dryly. Unless you have a compelling reason beyond wanting to get this off your desk, we'll proceed normally. Hale's attorney started to object, but the judge cut him off with a look. We're done here. Next case. The bailiff led Sarah back to the holding area where Park met her 20 minutes later with paperwork and a smile. Congratulations, he said. You're about to be a free woman. The bail bondsman was waiting in the courthouse lobby, a tired-looking man in his 50s who processed the paperwork with mechanical efficiency. 30 minutes later, Sarah walked out into autumn sunlight, still wearing the same scrubs she'd put on 36 hours ago, feeling like she'd aged a decade. Daniel was waiting on the courthouse steps, leaning on his crutches, and when he saw her, his whole face transformed with relief. You're out, he said. For now. I testified, told them everything I saw. They tried to make me sound crazy, but I didn't let them. Sarah felt her throat tighten. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. You stood up for me when nobody else would. The least I could do is stand up for you. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. I know we just met, but if there's anything I can do to help with the trial, there is. Park appeared beside them, offering Daniel his card. I'll need you to sit for a formal deposition. Tell your story on record with all the details. Can you do that? Daniel took the card, studied it. Yeah. When? Tomorrow afternoon, if possible. I want to get ahead of whatever strategy Hale's team is planning. They talked logistics while Sarah stood there feeling disconnected from her own life, watching it happen around her rather than to her. The exhaustion was catching up again, 36 hours with maybe 4 hours of sleep scattered through it, adrenaline crash hitting her system like a truck. Park noticed. You need rest, real rest. Go home, sleep for 12 hours, eat actual food. Don't talk to anyone about the case. Don't post on social media. Don't even jaywalk. Hale's people will be watching for anything they can use against you. I don't have a home to go to, Sarah said, and realized as she said it that it was true. She'd left her apartment 40 hours ago for a shift at the hospital and hadn't been back since. Her keys, her phone, her whole life was in an evidence locker somewhere, or maybe still in her car at the hospital parking lot. Park pulled out his phone. What's your address? I'll have someone drive you. She gave it to him, too tired to argue. 20 minutes later, she was in the passenger seat of Park's car, a sensible sedan that smelled like coffee and leather, while he navigated through midday traffic toward her apartment complex on the south side. They didn't talk much. Sarah was grateful for that. She stared out the window at the city she'd called home for 3 years, wondering how many people out there had seen her mugshot on the news, how many had already decided she was guilty, how many would remember this even after she was exonerated. If she was exonerated. Park pulled up in front of her building, a 3-story walk-up that had been cheap when she'd moved in and had only gotten cheaper as the neighborhood deteriorated around it. Her car was in its assigned space, which meant someone from the hospital had driven it home. Call me if you need anything, Park said. And Sarah, we're going to win this. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but we have the evidence, we have the witnesses, and we have the truth. That still counts for something. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice, and climbed out of the car. She made it up 3 flights of stairs on autopilot, unlocked her door with the spare key she kept under the mat, and stepped into her apartment. It looked exactly like she'd left it. Breakfast dishes in the sink, scrubs in a pile by the bathroom, bed unmade. A time capsule from before everything went wrong. She meant to shower, meant to eat, meant to do all the things Park had told her to do. Instead, she fell onto her bed fully clothed and was asleep before her head hit the pillow, dropping into unconsciousness like a stone into deep water. She dreamed of the diner again, but this time when Daniel fell, nobody helped him, and when she tried to stand up, she found she was chained to the booth, and Victor Hale stood over her laughing while his son ground Daniel's face into the floor, and everyone just watched, pulling out phones to record, to share, to consume and forget. She woke in darkness, her heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. The bedside clock read 2:47 a.m. She'd slept for almost 14 hours. Her phone was on the nightstand, placed there by someone thoughtful, already charged. She picked it up and found 63 missed calls, 214 text messages, and a social media presence that had exploded overnight. Someone had leaked her arrest to the press. The story was everywhere, local news, regional papers, social media, but the narrative wasn't what she'd expected. Instead of painting her as a violent aggressor, most of the coverage focused on a different angle. Decorated veteran, arrested for defending disabled Marine. And below that, Victor Hale's son facing questions after viral video shows harassment. Sarah clicked on a link with shaking hands and found herself watching Margaret Chen's footage, uploaded to every platform, viewed millions of times in less than a day. The comments section was a war zone. Some people calling Sarah a hero, others calling her a thug, most just arguing with each other about violence and justice and whether defending someone made you brave or made you a vigilante. But buried in all that noise, Sarah found something she hadn't expected. A hashtag. Hashtag I stand with Sarah. And a fundraiser, started by someone she didn't know to help with her legal fees. It had raised $40,000 in 12 hours. Sarah sat there in the darkness of her apartment, staring at the screen, watching the numbers climb while strangers from across the country contributed $5, $10, sometimes hundreds, sometimes just words of support. And for the first time since the handcuffs had clicked shut around her wrists, she felt something besides exhaustion and fear. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't fighting this battle alone. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Sergeant Major Williams from 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. We heard what happened. We're coming. Part B. Viet Tiep Ko Chuyen, Lin Muk Ngay to Ko Kui Part Hai, Kom Recap, Kom Zai." Sarah stared at the text message until the screen went dark, then lit it again with trembling fingers. Sergeant Major Williams. She didn't know the name, didn't know the battalion, but the message carried weight that transcended individual identity. Marines were coming. The words hung in the air of her dark apartment like a promise or a threat, and she wasn't sure which. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "Corporal James Rutherford, 1st Marine Division, saw what happened. We're mobilizing." Then another. "Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, flying in from San Diego. You don't stand alone." And another. The messages kept coming through the night like artillery fire, each one from a different name but carrying the same essential message. They were coming, they had heard, they would not let one of their own fall to injustice without a fight. Sarah sat cross-legged on her bed, watching the phone light up again and again, feeling something vast and incomprehensible building in the darkness beyond her walls. She tried to sleep but couldn't. At 5 a.m. she gave up, showered for the first time in 2 days, put on clean clothes that felt strange after the prison-issued jumpsuit and the blood-stained scrubs. She made coffee that actually tasted like coffee, and stood at her kitchen window watching the city wake up, wondering what the day would bring. The answer came at 7:30 when someone knocked on her door. Sarah checked the peephole and found herself looking at a man in his 50s wearing Marine Corps dress blues, ribbons covering his chest from collar to pocket, the kind of uniform you only saw at funerals and formal ceremonies. She opened the door. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Sergeant Major Robert Williams." He offered his hand. "I apologize for the early hour." Sarah shook his hand, noting the grip, firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who knew exactly how much force to apply. You texted me last night. I did. May I come in? She stepped aside and Williams entered with the bearing of someone inspecting a forward operating base, his eyes taking in details. The sparse furniture, the empty refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway, the general sense of a life being lived in survival mode rather than comfort. You live alone? He asked. Yes? No family nearby? No family anywhere. My parents died when I was 22, no siblings. Williams nodded like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. Captain Chen briefed me on your situation. I've also reviewed the video footage and the police reports. You defended Corporal Brooks from assault. He's a corporal? Former. Medical discharge after Fallujah in 2019. Lost his leg to an IED, lost his career to PTSD. The VA's been jerking him around on benefits for 3 years. Williams's jaw tightened. Point is, you saw a Marine in trouble and you acted. That matters. I'm not a Marine, I was Army. You served, you bled. The branch doesn't matter when it comes to taking care of our own. He pulled out his phone, showed her a screen that made her breath catch. This is the response so far. It was a spreadsheet with hundreds of names, organized by rank and location. Active duty, reserves, veterans scattered across 40 states. Next to each name was a notation, attending, traveling, confirmed. What is this? Sarah asked. This is your defense force. Every person on this list is coming to your trial. Some are flying in from overseas, some are driving for 2 days. All of them are coming because they heard what you did, and they will not let you face this alone. Sarah felt her legs go weak and sat down hard on her couch. I don't understand. I don't know these people. They know you, or they know what you represent. Every one of them has seen someone in trouble and wished they'd acted. Every one of them has watched the powerful abuse the powerless and felt helpless to stop it. You didn't feel helpless. You acted. That makes you dangerous to people like Victor Hale, and it makes you precious to people like us. The trial is 2 months away. The trial is in 4 days. Sarah's head snapped up. What? Victor Hale pulled strings, got a judge to move up the date citing public safety concerns and media circus. His lawyers filed the motion yesterday afternoon. Your attorney should be calling you any minute to... Her phone rang. Park's number. She answered on speaker. I just heard about the trial date. How did you... Never mind. Park sounded like he was speed-walking, his breath coming fast. Hale's team is trying to bulldoze us before we can build a proper defense. They want this over before the story gets any bigger, before public opinion solidifies. 4 days doesn't give us time to depose all the witnesses, doesn't give me time to prepare cross-examination, doesn't give us time to do anything except show up and hope. Can they do that? Sarah asked. Just change the trial date? Technically, no. Practically, yes, if you have enough money and know the right people. I've already filed an objection, but the judge denied it. We're going to trial on Friday, whether we're ready or not. Williams leaned toward the phone. This is Sergeant Major Williams, United States Marine Corps. I'm sitting with Miss Mitchell right now. Tell me what you need. A pause on Park's end. Who am I speaking with? Someone who's very interested in making sure Ms. Mitchell gets a fair trial. Are you planning to do anything illegal? I'm planning to fill that courtroom with every veteran in driving distance and make sure the jury sees exactly who they're being asked to convict. Is that illegal? Another pause. No, that's actually helpful. Visual representation of character and community support can influence jury perception. Park's voice shifted into planning mode. How many people can you guarantee? Williams checked his phone. Currently at 472 confirmed. Probably hit 600 by Friday. Sarah heard Park whistle softly. That's a lot of dress blues. That's the point. All right, I'll work with that. But I need something else. I need someone who can testify to Ms. Mitchell's character under fire. Someone with credibility the jury will respect. Someone who witnessed her in combat situations and can speak to her training and restraint. I can get you a dozen people like that. I only need one, the right one. Someone who outranks everyone else in the room, someone whose word carries absolute authority. Williams smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. I think I know exactly who to call. He hung up and immediately dialed another number, walking to Sarah's window while he waited for an answer. When someone picked up, Williams's voice shifted into formal precision. Colonel Harrison, it's Rob Williams. I need a favor.
And it's time sensitive. Yes, sir. I know you're retired. This isn't about active duty. This is about a former Army medic who defended one of ours and is being railroaded by a real estate developer with more money than sense. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. Bronze Star with Valor, 3 deployments, 14 documented combat saves. Friday morning, Graymont City Courthouse. No, sir. I'm asking you to testify as a character witness. You reviewed her after-action reports from Helmand. You recommended her for commendation. The jury needs to hear that from someone who outranks God in military circles. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. He ended the call and turned to Sarah. Colonel Marcus Harrison, retired Marine Corps, commanded the regional command that oversaw your area of operations in Afghanistan. He's flying in from Virginia tomorrow. Sarah felt like she was watching her life happen to someone else. This is insane. This is war. Just a different kind.
William sat down across from her, his expression hardening into something that might have been anger or might have been determination.
Victor Hale thinks he can crush you because you have no power, no money, no connections. He's about to learn that some connections don't show up on balance sheets. Some power doesn't come from bank accounts, and some wars aren't won by whoever spends the most money. The next 4 days moved with the surreal speed of combat, everything happening too fast to process but burned into memory with crystalline clarity. Park worked 18-hour days preparing the defense, coordinating with Williams to organize the veteran response, tracking down witnesses that Hale's legal team kept trying to intimidate into silence. Margaret Chen, the woman with the video footage, received threatening phone calls. Construction workers from the diner found themselves being audited by the IRS. The counterman got a visit from health inspectors who'd never cared about Riley's diner before. But nobody backed down. Sarah spent the time in a haze of preparation, sitting for depositions, reviewing her military records, being coached on how to testify without sounding rehearsed or defensive. Park brought in a jury consultant who made her practice answering hostile questions until she wanted to scream. They're going to paint you as a violent person, the consultant said. Someone who couldn't let go of military training, who saw threats everywhere, who responded with disproportionate force. You need to stay calm, stay truthful, and let the jury see you as human, not as a weapon. I am human, Sarah said. I know, but the prosecution is going to argue otherwise. They're going to use your training against you, make it seem like you're dangerous. Counter that by being the opposite, controlled, measured, empathetic. The media circus intensified. News vans parked outside Sarah's apartment building until the landlord threatened to call the cops. Reporters ambushed her in the parking lot, shoving microphones in her face, asking how it felt to assault children. She learned to say, "No comment," and keep walking, learned to tune out the shouted questions and the camera flashes. But not everyone was hostile. The fundraiser topped $100,000. Letters arrived from across the country, some supporting her, some condemning her, all of them proof that her story had touched something raw in the national consciousness. People were arguing about her in coffee shops and living rooms, on social media and cable news, turning her into a symbol for whatever cause they needed a symbol for. She tried to ignore it all and focus on the one thing that mattered, the truth. Thursday night, the evening before the trial, Williams showed up at her apartment again with Chinese takeout and a folder full of documents.
"Eat," he said, pushing containers across her kitchen table. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell." "Good. Means you're taking this seriously." He opened the folder. "This is Hale's witness list. His lawyers are bringing in expert witnesses to testify about your military training, psychologists to argue about PTSD and hypervigilance, character witnesses to talk about how traumatized his son is." Sarah picked at the food, her stomach too tight for hunger. "What about our witnesses?" "We have Margaret Chen with the video. We have Corporal Brooks to testify about what happened. We have the construction workers who saw the whole thing. We have the colonel flying in to speak about your character." Williams paused. "And we have something else. Something Hale doesn't know about yet." "What?" "His son has a record. Juvenile, sealed, but I have contacts who know people who remember."
3 incidents at 2 different prep schools. Assault, harassment. 1 case involving a disabled student that got settled quietly for a lot of money. Park is filing a motion tomorrow morning to have the records unsealed as character evidence. Sarah felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Will it work? 50-50. Judge might rule it's prejudicial, but even if he doesn't allow it, the fact that we tried to introduce it will make the jury wonder what we know. Plant doubt. Williams leaned back, studying her. How are you holding up? Real answer. I'm scared, Sarah admitted. Not of losing. I'm scared of that too, but mostly I'm scared that even if I win, this is who I am now. The violent nurse, the woman who attacked kids in a diner. That's what people will remember. Some people. Others will remember the woman who stood up when everyone else sat down. You don't get to control your legacy, Sarah. You just get to control your choices. My choice destroyed my life. Your choice saved a man's dignity. Sometimes those are the same thing. He left an hour later and Sarah tried to sleep but managed only fitful rest full of fragmented dreams. Courtrooms that turned into combat zones, juries made of faceless shadows. Victor Hale's voice echoing from every direction telling her to know her place. She woke at 5 a.m., showered, dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, gray slacks and a white blouse that Park had approved as sympathetic without looking weak. She stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. When had she gotten so thin? When had those lines appeared around her eyes? Park picked her up at 7. He looked exhausted but wired, running on caffeine and adrenaline. Ready? He asked. No. Good. Means you're not delusional. He pulled into traffic, navigating toward the courthouse. Listen to me carefully. This is going to be ugly. Hale's lead attorney is Miranda Cross. She's expensive, she's ruthless, and she wins cases by destroying people on the stand. She's going to come at you hard, try to make you lose your temper, try to make you look unstable. Don't take the bait. I won't. Say it like you mean it. I won't take the bait. Better. Park took a corner fast enough to make the tires squeal. Remember, short answers, stick to facts, don't elaborate unless asked. If you don't know something, say you don't know. If you don't remember, say you don't remember. Never guess. Never assume. Never lie. I know all this. I know you know. I'm telling you anyway because when you're on that stand and Cross is shredding you, knowing something and doing something are different things. They arrived at the courthouse at 7:45. Sarah expected a crowd but wasn't prepared for what she found. The entire front plaza was filled with veterans in dress uniforms, hundreds of them, standing in formation like they were waiting for inspection, silent and still as statues. Marine Corps blues, Army greens, Navy whites, Air Force service dress. They stood in ranks organized by branch and unit, a display of military precision that stopped traffic on the street and drew news cameras like moths to flame. Sarah climbed out of Park's car and just stared. Sergeant Major Williams appeared at her elbow. 473 present, another 100 inside securing seats. We've been here since 0500. This is... Sarah couldn't find words. This is what happens when you defend one of ours. Come on, we need to get you inside. The veterans parted to create a corridor, and Sarah walked through it feeling like she was being escorted to execution or coronation, unable to tell which. None of them spoke. None of them broke formation, but every single one of them met her eyes as she passed, and in those gazes she saw recognition, respect, and something that looked like rage held on a leash. The courthouse steps were mobbed with reporters, but the veterans had created a buffer zone that kept the cameras at distance. Sarah made it inside without having to answer questions, though she heard them shouted anyway, questions about violence and veterans and whether she regretted defending Brooks, whether she thought she was above the law, whether military training made her a danger to society. Park guided her through security and up to the courtroom on the 3rd floor. The gallery was already packed, veterans filling every available seat with overflow standing at the back. The prosecution table was occupied by Miranda Cross and her team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits arrayed around her like apostles around a prophet. Cross was 50-something, silver-haired, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. She looked up when Sarah entered and smiled with all the warmth of a shark. Victor Hale sat in the front row of the gallery behind the prosecution, his son and the dark-haired friend flanking him like bookends. Both boys looked nervous, shifting in their seats, eyes darting to the sea of uniforms filling the courtroom. Victor himself looked confident, almost bored, checking his phone like this was just another business meeting. Daniel Brooks sat behind the defense table, dressed in his own uniform, chest full of ribbons he'd earned the hard way. When he saw Sarah, he nodded once, a gesture of solidarity that made her throat tight. The bailiff called for all to rise. Judge Raymond Chen entered, no relation to Margaret or Jessica, according to Park's briefing. Mid-60s, Asian American, appointed to the bench 15 years ago with a reputation for fairness but also for strict adherence to procedure. He surveyed the packed courtroom with raised eyebrows. "This is quite the turnout," he observed dryly. "I trust everyone understands that outbursts or disruptions will result in immediate removal from these proceedings?" The veterans remained silent. "Good. Let's begin. Bailiff, bring in the jury." The jury filed in, 12 citizens who would decide Sarah's future, their faces carefully neutral in that way juries have when they know they're being watched. 6 men, 6 women. Mix of ages and ethnicities. Park had spent hours on jury selection, using his allotted strikes to remove anyone with obvious bias, while Cross had systematically eliminated anyone with military connections. Judge Chen gavelled the court to order. "We are here for the trial of Sarah Mitchell, charged with 2 counts of assault and battery." Cross. "Your opening statement." Miranda Cross stood with the fluid grace of someone who owned every room she entered. She walked to the jury box and smiled like they were old friends. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about violence, about what happens when someone with military training decides that violence is an acceptable response to words, about 2 young men who went to a diner for breakfast and left bloodied and traumatized because they had the misfortune of encountering someone who never learned to leave the battlefield behind." She gestured to the boys sitting behind her. "Tyler Hale and Marcus Penn are 18 years old. They're students, they're sons. They're young men with their whole lives ahead of them, or they were, until Sarah Mitchell decided to assault them in a public place in front of dozens of witnesses." Park started to rise, but Cross kept talking. "The defense will try to tell you this was self-defense. They'll show you video of a scuffle, an argument, maybe some words that shouldn't have been said. But ask yourselves, does an argument justify violence? Does being annoyed give someone the right to physically attack 2 boys half her size?" "Objection," Park said quietly. "Mischaracterization. The defendants aren't half Miss Mitchell's size by any metric." "Sustained," Judge Chen said. "Ms. Cross, stick to facts." Cross didn't even blink. "The facts are simple. Sarah Mitchell has extensive combat training. She served 3 tours in Afghanistan where she learned how to neutralize threats with lethal efficiency. She returned home with that training intact, but without the military structure to control it. And when she encountered a situation she didn't like in a civilian setting, she defaulted to violence." She walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each member. "We will present expert testimony about military training and its effects. We will show you how someone with Ms. Mitchell's background can be dangerous even when they don't intend to be. We will demonstrate that her actions that morning were not defensive. They were aggressive, disproportionate, and criminal." Cross turned to face Sarah directly. "The defendant wants you to see her as a hero, but heroes don't assault children in diners. Heroes don't use their training to bully and intimidate. At the end of this trial, I'm confident you'll see Sarah Mitchell for what she is, a violent individual who belongs behind bars, not on our streets." She sat down. The courtroom remained silent, but Sarah could feel the rage radiating from the veterans in the gallery like heat from asphalt. Park touched her arm, a warning. "Stay calm." "Mr. Park," Judge Chen said, "your opening statement." Park stood and approached the jury with none of Cross's theatrical flair. He looked like exactly what he was, a working attorney who'd been preparing for 4 days instead of 4 weeks, exhausted and outgunned but still fighting. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client is sitting right there, Sarah Mitchell, former Army medic, ICU nurse, decorated veteran who spent 3 deployments saving lives under fire." He paused. "She's also someone who weighs 117 pounds, stands 5'4", and was awake for 31 hours straight when she walked into Riley's diner that Tuesday morning." He gestured to the boys. "Tyler Hale is 6'2" and weighs 215 pounds. Marcus Penn is 5'11" and 190. Combined, they outweigh my client by nearly 200 pounds. Combined, they were young, rested, and looking for trouble." Park pulled out a tablet, loaded Margaret Chen's video. "You're going to see footage of what really happened. Not the story the prosecution wants to tell, but the actual events. You'll see two young men harass a disabled Marine veteran. You'll see them knock him to the ground. You'll see them laugh about it while he struggled with his crutches. He played a segment of the video on the courtroom screens, and Sarah watched the jury's faces shift as they saw Daniel fall, saw the boys laugh. You'll also see my client stand up, Park continued. Not to attack, not to assault, but to help. She knelt beside Corporal Brooks. She checked if he was injured. She helped him to his feet. And only when Tyler Hale physically grabbed her wrist did she defend herself. He played that segment, and Sarah saw several jury members lean forward. The prosecution wants you to believe Sarah Mitchell is dangerous because of her military training, but that training is exactly why this incident ended with bruises instead of broken bones. She used the minimum force necessary to neutralize a threat, and then immediately disengaged. That's not assault. That's textbook self-defense. Park walked back to the defense table. At the end of this trial, you're going to be asked to decide if protecting someone who can't protect themselves is a crime. If standing up to bullies makes you a criminal. If using your training to prevent harm rather than cause, it makes you dangerous. I trust you'll reach the right conclusion. He sat down. Judge Chen checked his notes. Ms. Cross, call your first witness. The prosecution calls Tyler Hale. The courtroom stirred as Tyler stood and walked to the witness stand. He'd been coached well. His movements were measured, his expression appropriately solemn. The bailiff swore him in, and he sat, looking young and vulnerable in the harsh courtroom lighting. Cross approached with maternal concern. Tyler, I know this is difficult. Take your time. Can you tell the jury what happened on the morning of October 15th? Tyler took a deep breath. The picture of traumatized youth. Marcus and I went to Riley's diner for breakfast before class. We were just sitting there talking when this man with crutches came in. He was having trouble walking, kind of bumping into things. We felt bad for him. Sarah felt Park tense beside her, but his face remained neutral. Go on, Cross prompted. There was this woman in the corner, the defendant. She was staring at us really intensely, like she was angry about something. It made us uncomfortable, but we tried to ignore it. Tyler shifted in his seat. The man with crutches lost his balance and fell. It was an accident. We were going to help him, but before we could, that woman jumped up and started yelling at us. What did she say? She said we knocked him down on purpose. She said we needed to leave. We tried to explain it was an accident, but she wouldn't listen. She kept getting more aggressive, getting in our space. I put my hand out to kind of keep distance between us, and she just attacked me. Tyler's voice cracked convincingly. She twisted my arm behind my back and forced me to the ground. It happened so fast I couldn't even defend myself. Then Marcus tried to help me, and she threw him across the room. We were both on the floor, and she was just standing there looking at us like she wanted to kill us. How did that make you feel? Cross asked softly. Terrified. I thought she was going to really hurt us. I've never been that scared in my life. Cross let that hang for a moment. Thank you, Tyler. No further questions. Park stood. Tyler, you testified that you and Marcus felt bad for Corporal Brooks when you saw him struggling with his crutches. Is that correct? Yes. Did you offer to help him? Tyler hesitated. We were going to. But you didn't actually offer, yes or no? No, but yes or no, Tyler? No. Park pulled out his tablet. I'm going to play a segment of video taken by a witness. This is you and Marcus speaking to Corporal Brooks. Can you listen and tell the jury if you remember saying these words? He played the audio. Tyler's voice came through clearly. What happened to your leg? Skateboarding accident? Tyler's face went red. We were just asking, did you say those words, yes or no? Yes. And these words? Park played more. Did you forget to wear your helmet? That was just, yes or no? Yes. Park played another segment. Marcus's voice this time. Maybe you should call an Uber. Probably safer than trying to walk. And you laughed when he said that, correct? Tyler looked at his father, then at Cross, finding no rescue. I might have. You might have, or you did. I did. You testified that Corporal Brooks lost his balance and fell accidentally. But the video shows him trying to walk past you and Marcus, and you repeatedly moving to block his path. Were you blocking him? No, We were just standing there. Park played another segment showing exactly that. Tyler and Marcus shifting position every time Daniel tried to go around them, a deliberate dance of cruelty. Still just standing there, Tom? Park asked. Objection, Cross said. Argumentative. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Park. You testified that you put your hand out to keep distance between you and Miss Mitchell. Let me show you what that looked like. He played the video of Tyler grabbing Sarah's wrist, his fingers clearly closing around it, his other hand coming up as if to push her. The jury watched in silence. That looked like keeping distance to you? Park asked. Tyler's jaw worked. She was threatening us. By kneeling beside an injured veteran? By telling you to leave? Those are threats? She was acting crazy. Acting crazy or acting like someone who'd had enough of watching you torture a disabled man? Objection! Withdrawn. Park stepped closer to the witness stand. Tyler, have you ever been accused of harassing other students? Cross shot to her feet. Objection! The witness is not on trial here. Your Honor, this goes to credibility and pattern of behavior. Approach, Judge Chen said. Both lawyers moved to the bench for a whispered conference that Sarah couldn't hear. After a minute, they returned and the judge addressed the jury. The objection is sustained. Mr. Park, confine your questions to the events of October 15th. Park nodded, but Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. He'd planted the seed. The jury would wonder what he'd been trying to ask. No further questions, Park said. The prosecution called Marcus Penn next, and his testimony matched Tyler's almost word for word. Too perfectly, Park noted on his legal pad. They'd been coached to tell the same story, but real memories don't align that precisely. He cross-examined Marcus with the same video segments, got the same reluctant admissions, and by the time the second witness stepped down, the jury looked skeptical. Cross called her expert witness, Dr. Raymond Foster, a psychologist who specialized in PTSD and military trauma. He had credentials that took 5 minutes to read into the record and an air of academic authority that filled the courtroom. Dr. Foster, Cross began, can you explain how military combat training affects the brain? Certainly. Combat training creates neural pathways that prioritize threat assessment and rapid response. Soldiers are trained to identify threats and neutralize them with overwhelming force before those threats can cause harm. This is essential in war zones, but problematic in civilian settings. Why is it problematic? Because the threat assessment calibration is set for combat, not everyday life. Someone with extensive military training might perceive normal civilian interactions as threatening and respond with disproportionate force. Cross walked him through a detailed explanation of hypervigilance, PTSD, and difficulty reintegrating into civilian society. It was compelling testimony, backed by research and statistics, and Sarah watched the jury absorb it with growing concern. Park's cross-examination was surgical. Dr. Foster, have you ever evaluated Miss Mitchell? No. Have you reviewed her medical records? No. Have you spoken with her commanding officers, her colleagues, or anyone who's worked with her in the field? No. So everything you just testified about is generalized information about military training, not specific information about my client. Correct? Foster adjusted his glasses. I was asked to speak about military training generally, yes. You mentioned hypervigilance and PTSD. Did you review Ms. Mitchell's psychological evaluations? I wasn't provided with them. Because they show no diagnosis of PTSD, no hypervigilance, no difficulty adapting to civilian life. Park pulled out a document. In fact, her discharge evaluation notes that she demonstrated exceptional emotional regulation under stress and superior judgment in high-pressure situations. Does that change your testimony? Not substantially. Training creates patterns regardless of individual psychology. So your testimony is that anyone with military training is dangerous by default? Objection, Cross said. I'll rephrase. In your expert opinion, does military training automatically make someone more likely to respond with inappropriate violence? Not automatically, but it increases the risk. By what percentage? That varies widely depending on individual factors. You don't have a number? Not a precise one? No. So when you testified that Ms. Mitchell's training made her response problematic, you were speculating? I was making an informed professional judgment based on patterns. Thank you, Dr. Foster. No further questions. The morning dragged on through more witnesses. The boys' friends who hadn't been at the diner but testified to how traumatized Tyler and Marcus were, a doctor who examined minor bruising and called it serious injury, a psychologist who evaluated the boys and diagnosed acute stress disorder. Park dismantled each one methodically, showing gaps in testimony, contradictions, the difference between what they claimed and what the evidence showed. But Sarah could see the jury was still uncertain, still wrestling with the question Cross had planted. Was military training itself dangerous? They broke for lunch at noon. Sarah couldn't eat, could barely breathe. Park took her to a conference room away from the media and the crowds. "You're doing great," he said. "Just stay focused. They're making me sound like a weapon." Cross is trying to, but the evidence is on our side. This afternoon we start presenting our case, and everything changes. Sarah wanted to believe him. When court resumed, Park called his first witness. The defense calls Margaret Chen. The elderly woman walked to the stand with her head high, carrying a dignity that made Victor Hale shift uncomfortably in his seat. She was sworn in, and Park approached gently. "Mrs. Chen, can you tell us what you saw on the morning of October 15th? Margaret's voice was clear and steady. "I saw two boys harass a veteran until he fell. I saw them laugh about it. I saw them grab Ms. Mitchell when she tried to help. And I saw her defend herself and that veteran with exactly as much force as necessary and not one bit more." "You recorded video of the incident?" "I did. My grandson taught me how to use my phone camera." "I'm glad he did." Park played the full video. Not snippets, but the entire sequence from the moment the boys entered the diner until the police arrived. The jury watched in silence as the harassment escalated, as Daniel fell, as the boys laughed, as Sarah stood up and was grabbed, as she defended herself with controlled precision. When it finished, Park asked, "In your opinion, did Ms. Mitchell attack those boys?" "No, she protected that veteran and herself. There's a difference." Cross's cross-examination was brief and unsuccessful. Margaret refused to be rattled, refused to change her testimony, and when Cross tried to suggest her age might affect her memory, Margaret fixed her with a look that could freeze steel. "Young lady, I may be 73, but I know what I saw. Those boys were cruel. Miss Mitchell was brave. And if you can't tell the difference, that's your problem, not mine." Several jury members smiled. Park called Daniel Brooks next. Daniel approached the stand on his crutches, the journey from the gallery to the witness box taking twice as long as it should have, every step a reminder of what he'd sacrificed and what he'd lost. He settled into the chair with visible effort, balanced his crutches against the stand, and met Park's eyes. "State your name and rank for the record." "Daniel Marcus Brooks, former corporal, United States Marine Corps." "How did you lose your leg, Corporal Brooks?" Cross stood. "Objection? Relevance?" "It's relevant to establish the witness's status and why he was in the diner that morning," Park said. "Overruled. You may answer." Daniel's voice was steady. "IED outside Fallujah, November 2019. Killed my driver. Took my leg below the knee initially, but infection meant they had to amputate above the knee later." "Thank you for your service," Park said. And meant it. "Can you tell the jury what happened at Riley's diner?" Daniel walked through it. The harassment, the mocking, the deliberate blocking of his path. His voice never wavered, but Sarah could see his hands shaking slightly, could see the cost of reliving it. "When I fell, what did the defendants do?" "They laughed, pulled out a phone to record, made jokes about life alert." "What did Miss Mitchell do?" "She helped me, checked if I was hurt, treated me with respect. First person all morning who did." "And when the defendants approached her?" "One of them grabbed her wrist, the other one rushed her. She defended herself and me, stopped them without seriously hurting them. I've seen Marines in combat use less restraint against actual enemies." Cross stood for cross-examination, her expression predatory. "Mr. Brooks, you received psychiatric treatment for PTSD, correct?" "Yes." "You've been hospitalized twice for mental health crises?" "Yes." "You take medication that affects perception and memory?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I take medication that helps me function. It doesn't make me hallucinate." "But it does affect your brain chemistry." Same way insulin affects a diabetic's blood sugar. Doesn't mean I don't know what I saw. You feel grateful to Ms. Mitchell for helping you, don't you? I feel grateful she stood up when nobody else would. Grateful enough to lie for her? Park shot to his feet. Objection! Accusatory and inflammatory. Sustained. Ms. Cross, I'm warning you. But the damage was done. Cross had planted doubt. Suggested Daniel's testimony was colored by gratitude or mental illness or both. She sat down looking satisfied. Park called 3 of the construction workers next, and their testimony was consistent. They'd seen the harassment, seen the fall, seen Sarah defend herself. Cross tried to shake them, but they were working men with no reason to lie and no tolerance for bullying, and they held firm. The afternoon wore on. Park called the colonel last, saving him for maximum impact. Colonel Marcus Harrison entered the courtroom in Marine Corps dress blues that looked like they'd been starched by divine intervention. He was 62 but moved like a younger man, his posture military perfect, his bearing that of someone who'd commanded thousands and earned every bit of authority he carried. The jury sat up straighter as he took the stand. Park approached respectfully. Colonel Harrison, can you explain your connection to this case? I reviewed Specialist Mitchell's after-action reports from her deployments in Afghanistan. I also had operational command over the region where she served during her 3rd deployment. What can you tell us about her performance? Harrison's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Specialist Mitchell saved 14 lives under fire. She performed battlefield triage in conditions most people can't imagine. She extracted wounded soldiers from vehicles under active enemy fire. She worked 48-hour shifts in field hospitals treating casualties from multiple units. Her performance was exemplary in every metric. Can you speak to her use of force? I can. I reviewed multiple incidents where Specialist Mitchell encountered hostile combatants while performing medical duties. In every case, every single one, she used the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat and immediately returned to providing medical care. She could have killed. She chose not to. That takes discipline most soldiers never develop. Park let that settle over the jury. In your professional opinion, based on your knowledge of Miss Mitchell's training and record, would she attack 2 unarmed civilians without justification? Harrison looked directly at Sarah, then at the jury. No. If Sarah Mitchell put hands on someone, it's because they gave her no choice. And if they walked away with bruises instead of broken bones, it's because she showed them more mercy than they probably deserved. Cross approached for cross-examination with visible caution. Even she knew better than to attack a decorated Marine colonel head-on. Colonel Harrison, you testified that you reviewed Ms. Mitchell's after-action reports. Did you witness any of the incidents described personally? No, I was commanding at the regional level. So your testimony is based on reports written by others? Reports written by officers I trained and trust, yes. But you can't speak to what actually happened in those incidents. Harrison's expression hardened. I can speak to the pattern those reports reveal. A pattern of courage, restraint, and judgment under fire. That pattern doesn't change just because someone changes uniforms. But military judgment isn't the same as civilian judgment, is it? No, military judgment is usually better. We train for it, we test for it, we stake lives on it. Cross tried a few more angles, but Harrison stonewalled her with the kind of calm authority that came from decades of command. She finally gave up and sat down. Judge Chen checked the time. It's 4:30. We'll recess for the day and resume tomorrow morning at 9. Jury is reminded not to discuss the case or review any media coverage. The gavel fell and Sarah felt the weight of the day crash down on her. Park touched her shoulder. Good first day. Harrison was perfect. The jury is thinking. Is thinking enough? It's all we can ask for. Williams appeared as they left the courtroom, falling into step beside them. Media's waiting outside. We've got a corridor cleared if you want to avoid them. Sarah followed him gratefully through back hallways and a service exit that deposited them in a parking garage away from the cameras. Park's car was waiting. Go home, Park said. Rest. Tomorrow, we put you on the stand. Sarah's stomach dropped. Tomorrow? It's the right move. Let the jury hear from you directly. Let them see you as human. Trust me. She wanted to argue but didn't have the energy. She climbed into Park's car and let him drive her home through evening traffic while her mind spun with everything that had happened and everything still to come. Tomorrow, she would testify. Tomorrow, she would face Cross's cross-examination. Tomorrow, the jury would decide if defending someone made her a hero or a criminal. She spent the evening trying to prepare, reviewing notes Park had given her, practicing answers to hostile questions. But her mind kept wandering to Daniel Brooks on that witness stand, to the way his hands shook as he described falling, to the casual cruelty of boys who'd never faced consequences and saw no reason to start. She fell asleep on her couch with Park's notes scattered around her, and woke at 3 a.m. to her phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number. "Drop the charges or we destroy you. This is your last chance." Sarah stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it and went back to sleep. Because some things were worth destroying your life for. And standing up to bullies was one of them. The courthouse steps were colder the second morning, autumn settling into the concrete with the kind of chill that promised winter wasn't far behind. Sarah arrived at 7:45 to find the veteran formations had doubled in size, nearly 1,000 now, according to Williams, who met her at the security checkpoint with coffee and a grim expression. "Threat assessment team swept your apartment last night," he said quietly. "Found a tracking device on your car, professional grade. Someone's watching you." Sarah's hand tightened on the coffee cup. "Hale?" "Can't prove it, but Park filed a motion this morning requesting a criminal investigation. Judge denied it, said it's not relevant to the current proceedings." Williams' jaw worked. "You need to be careful. People with Hale's money don't make threats they can't follow through on." Park appeared beside them, looking like he'd slept even less than Sarah. "Ready?" "No." "Good answer. Let's go make you sound like someone the jury wants to acquit." The courtroom was already packed, the same sea of uniforms filling the gallery, the same reporters cramming the press section, the same jury filing in with faces that revealed nothing. Victor Hale sat in his usual spot behind the prosecution table, but this morning he looked different, tense, constantly checking his phone, whispering urgently to Miranda Cross, who kept shaking her head at whatever he was saying. Judge Chen gavelled the court to order. "Mr. Park, call your next witness." The defense calls Sarah Mitchell. The walk from the defense table to the witness stand felt like crossing a minefield. Every eye in the courtroom tracked her movement. The bailiff swore her in, and she sat, her hands folded in her lap, trying to channel the calm she'd learned in trauma bays when everything was going wrong but you still had to function. Park approached with measured steps. "Ms. Mitchell, can you tell the jury about your military service?" "I enlisted in the Army at 22, trained as a combat medic. Served 3 deployments in Afghanistan between 2017 and 2022. "Why did you enlist?" "My parents died in a car accident my senior year of college. I had student loans, no family, no real direction. The Army offered purpose and a way to pay for medical school eventually." "Did you see combat?" "Yes. Multiple engagements. I treated casualties under fire, performed field triage, worked in forward surgical teams." Park walked her through her service record, the missions, the commendations, the Bronze Star citation that made several jury members sit forward. He asked about her medical discharge, her transition to civilian life, her work at Graymont Memorial. Sarah answered each question truthfully, keeping her voice steady, letting the jury see her as human rather than weapon. "Let's talk about October 15th, Park said. "You just finished a shift at the hospital?" 31 hours. "We were understaffed, and I'd covered for 2 other nurses who'd called out sick." "How did you feel?" "Exhausted. I just wanted coffee before going home to sleep." "Walk us through what you saw when you entered Riley's diner." Sarah described it: Daniel's entrance, the boys' harassment, the escalation. She kept her testimony clinical, factual, but she could feel the emotion underneath threatening to break through. "When Corporal Brooks fell, what went through your mind?" "That nobody was helping him. That these kids were treating him like entertainment. That it was wrong." "So you intervened?" "I helped him up, checked if he was injured. That's what I'm trained to do." "And when Tyler Hale grabbed your wrist?" Sarah met the jury's eyes. "I assessed the threat. 2 males, both larger than me, both aggressive, one making physical contact without consent. I used basic defensive techniques to neutralize the immediate danger without causing serious injury." "You could have hurt them worse?" "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Because the goal wasn't to hurt them. It was to stop them. Park nodded. No further questions. Miranda Cross rose like a predator who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. She approached the witness stand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ms. Mitchell, you testified that you were exhausted when you entered the diner, correct? Yes. 31 hours without sleep. That's beyond what medical studies recommend for safe functioning, isn't it? It's not ideal, but it's common in healthcare. Common doesn't mean safe. Would you say your judgment was impaired? No, I was tired but functional. Functional enough to accurately assess a threat? Or might exhaustion have made you perceive danger where none existed? Sarah kept her voice level. I didn't perceive danger. I witnessed harassment and assault. Cross pulled out a document. You mentioned basic defensive techniques. According to your military records, you completed 3 levels of Army combatives training. That's hand-to-hand combat, correct? It's defensive tactics. Tactics designed to disable enemy combatants. Tactics designed to protect yourself and others. By breaking bones, dislocating joints, rendering opponents unconscious. Park stood. Objection. Ms. Mitchell didn't break any bones or render anyone unconscious. Sustained. Ms. Cross, ask about what happened, not what could have happened. Cross shifted angles. You testified that you assessed the threat. What specifically about 2 boys standing in a diner constituted a threat requiring physical intervention? One of them grabbed me, the other rushed me. That's assault. Or was it a frightened teenager trying to stop a strange woman who was yelling at him? I wasn't yelling. You were agitated, though. Exhausted, stressed, running on adrenaline from a long shift. Maybe you overreacted to a harmless situation? Sarah felt the trap closing, but kept her composure. The situation wasn't harmless. They'd just knocked a disabled veteran to the floor. According to you and one other witness, but multiple people in that diner say they didn't see the boys touch Corporal Brooks. They saw him fall, certainly, but fall on his own. Maybe you invented the assault to justify your own violence. I didn't invent anything. The video shows a scuffle. It doesn't show who initiated contact. It doesn't show what words were said before the physical contact. It's incomplete evidence that you're asking the jury to interpret in your favor. Park objected, but Judge Chen overruled him. Cross was staying just inside the lines. Let's talk about your psychological state, Cross continued. You've experienced combat trauma. You've seen people die. You've been in situations where split-second decisions meant life or death. Do you think that affects how you perceive civilian interactions? I think it makes me better at staying calm under pressure. Or does it make you see threats everywhere? Does it make you default to violence when de-escalation would work? I tried to de-escalate. I told them to leave. They refused. And when they refused, you attacked them. When one grabbed me and the other rushed me, I defended myself. Cross walked to the prosecution table, picked up a photo of Tyler's bruised shoulder. You call this defense? A dislocated joint, severe bruising, trauma that required medical treatment? I call it the minimum force necessary to stop an assault in progress. Minimum force. From someone who's trained to kill with her bare hands. Park shot to his feet. Objection. Inflammatory and inaccurate. Sustained. Ms. Cross, final warning. Cross smiled like she'd gotten what she wanted anyway. She'd planted the image in the jury's minds. Sarah as a trained killer, dangerous and barely restrained. No further questions. Sarah returned to the defense table, feeling like she'd been stripped down to bone. Park touched her shoulder but said nothing. What was there to say? Judge Chen called for a lunch recess. Sarah couldn't eat, could barely breathe. She spent the hour in a conference room while Park paced and checked his phone compulsively. Something's happening, he muttered. Cross keeps getting messages. Hale looks ready to explode. They know something we don't. Is that good or bad? Unknown, but it's definitely something. When court resumed, the prosecution rested its case without calling additional witnesses. Cross stood and addressed the judge with barely concealed tension. Your Honor, the prosecution rests. We believe we've demonstrated clear evidence of assault and are confident the jury will reach the appropriate verdict. Park stood immediately. Your Honor, the defense has one more witness we'd like to call. Judge Chen checked his notes. This witness wasn't on your list, Mr. Park. We only learned of their existence last night, Your Honor, but their testimony is crucial to establishing the defendant's pattern of behavior and credibility. Cross was on her feet. Objection. The defense can't introduce surprise witnesses at the last minute. Your Honor, this witness has direct knowledge of prior incidents involving Tyler Hale that go to character and veracity. The jury deserves to hear it. Victor Hale was whispering urgently to Cross, his face flushed. Judge Chen looked between the attorneys, clearly annoyed. Approach. Both lawyers moved to the bench for a heated discussion Sarah couldn't hear. It lasted 5 minutes, voices rising and falling, hands gesturing. Finally, they returned and the judge addressed the courtroom. I'm allowing the witness. But Mr. Park, this is highly irregular and I'm not pleased. Make it count. Park nodded. The defense calls Robert Hendricks. A man entered from the back of the courtroom, early 30s, well-dressed, carrying himself with the careful posture of someone who'd been broken and rebuilt. He took the stand and was sworn in while Tyler Hale's face went pale. Park approached gently. Mr. Hendricks, can you tell us where you know Tyler Hale from? Westbridge Preparatory School. We were classmates from 9th through 11th grade. Can you describe an incident involving Tyler from your time there? Hendricks took a breath. Junior year, I was in a wheelchair recovering from surgery on my spine. Tyler and some friends thought it was funny to block hallways, make me late to classes. One day they pushed my chair down a flight of stairs. The courtroom went silent. What happened to you? Park asked quietly. Fractured vertebrae. 6 months of additional physical therapy. I eventually recovered enough to walk again, but it was close. What happened to Tyler? His father donated a new science building. Tyler transferred to a different school. The incident was sealed as part of a settlement. Cross shot up. Objection! This is clearly inadmissible. Juvenile records are sealed for a reason. Your Honor, Park said, Mr. Hendricks is testifying about his own experience, not sealed records. He has every right to speak about what happened to him. Judge Chen looked grim. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Park. Did you report Tyler's assault to the school? Yes. To the administration, to the police, but the Hales' lawyers made it clear that fighting would be expensive and painful. My family couldn't afford to fight, so we took the settlement and I transferred schools. Did Tyler face any consequences? Not that I know of. Last I heard he was at another prep school, probably doing the same thing to someone else. Park let that settle. Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. I know this wasn't easy. Cross approached for cross-examination, her expression carefully neutral despite the bomb that had just detonated. Mr. Hendricks, you were paid as part of this settlement, correct? My medical bills were covered. There was no additional payment. But you signed a non-disclosure agreement? Yes. Which you're now violating by testifying here? Yes. You understand that could have legal consequences for you? Hendricks met her eyes. I understand. But I'm tired of people like Tyler hurting people like me and getting away with it because their fathers have money. If there are consequences for telling the truth, I'll accept them. Cross tried a few more angles, but Hendricks held firm. When she sat down, Park called his next witness. The defense calls Principal Elizabeth Warren from Westbridge Preparatory School. An older woman took the stand, clearly uncomfortable but determined. Park established her credentials, then asked the key question. Principal Warren, were there other incidents involving Tyler Hale during his time at Westbridge? Warren glanced at Victor Hale, then at the jury, making her choice. 3 documented incidents of harassment or assault. 2 were settled quietly. The 3rd resulted in his expulsion, though that was later reversed after the donation of the new building. Why did you agree to reverse the expulsion? The board overruled me. Mr. Hale made it clear that either Tyler returned or the donation would be withdrawn, and he'd use his influence to have me removed. I have a family to support. I made the choice I felt I had to make. Her voice hardened. But I've regretted it every day since. Park thanked her and let Cross cross-examine, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the pattern: Tyler hurting people, Victor using money to erase consequences, institutions bending to power because fighting costs too much. When Warren stepped down, Park addressed the judge. Your Honor, the defense rests. Very well. We'll break for 15 minutes, then proceed to closing arguments. The gallery erupted in whispered conversations as the jury filed out. Sarah watched Victor Hale lean over to Cross, his face twisted with rage, mouthing words that looked like threats. Cross shook her head repeatedly, gesturing for him to calm down. Williams appeared at the defense table. Whatever Park just did, Hale is losing his mind over it. His lawyers are in full damage control. Is it enough? Sarah asked. To win? Maybe. To destroy Hale's reputation? Definitely. Court reconvened and Cross delivered her closing argument with professional polish despite the obvious cracks in her case. She hammered on Sarah's military training, her exhaustion, the danger of vigilante justice. It was competent but defensive, trying to rebuild credibility after the character witnesses had demolished Tyler's victim narrative. Then Park stood for his closing. Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't complicated. It's actually very simple. Two young men with a history of bullying and assault harassed a disabled veteran. They knocked him down. They laughed. And when someone stood up to stop them, they grabbed her and rushed her. Everything that happened after that was self-defense. He walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each member. The prosecution wants you to believe Sarah Mitchell is dangerous because of her training, but that training is exactly why Tyler Hale and Marcus Penn walked away with bruises instead of broken bones. She showed restraint. She used minimum necessary force. She stopped the threat and immediately disengaged. Park gestured to where the veterans sat in the gallery. Look at the people in this courtroom. Hundreds of veterans who came from across the country to support someone they've never met. Why? Because they recognize what happened here. They've seen bullies operate. They've watched people with power crush people without it. And they know that sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, someone stands up and says, "No more." He turned back to the jury. Sarah Mitchell didn't attack two boys in a diner. She protected a man who couldn't protect himself. She did what we train soldiers to do, defend those who need defending. And now you're being asked to punish her for it. Park picked up Margaret Chen's tablet, loaded the video one more time. Watch this again. Watch Tyler and Marcus mock a disabled veteran. Watch them knock him down. Watch them laugh. Then watch Sarah Mitchell do what should have been done. Stop them. He played the crucial 30 seconds. The jury watched in silence. The prosecution says this is about violence. It's not. It's about bullies who thought their father's money would protect them from consequences. It's about a woman who was brave enough to prove them wrong. And it's about whether you're going to let Victor Hale buy his son's way out of accountability one more time. Park returned to the defense table. Sarah Mitchell stood up when everyone else sat down. Now I'm asking you to stand up too. Find her not guilty. Send a message that justice isn't for sale. He sat down. Judge Chen gave the jury their instructions, definitions of assault, burden of proof, reasonable doubt. Sarah tried to focus, but the words blurred together. After 40 minutes of legal language, the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate. All rise. The jury filed out. Sarah stood on legs that felt like water, watching 12 strangers carry her future into a closed room where she couldn't follow. Park touched her shoulder. Now we wait. How long? Could be hours, could be days. Try not to... The courtroom door burst open and a woman rushed in, breathless, carrying a folder that she thrust at Park. You need to see this, right now. Park opened the folder, and his eyes went wide. Your Honor, the defense requests an immediate conference in chambers. Judge Chen looked annoyed. Mr. Park, the jury is deliberating. This can't wait, Your Honor. New evidence has come to light that fundamentally changes this case. Cross stood. Your Honor, this is absurd. The defense can't introduce new evidence after closing arguments. It's not new evidence about the assault, Park said. It's evidence about witness tampering and jury intimidation. The courtroom went silent. Judge Chen's expression hardened. Chambers, now, both attorneys. They disappeared through a side door. Sarah sat frozen while Williams leaned over the barrier. What just happened? She whispered. I don't know. But whatever it is, Hale looks like he's about to have a stroke. Victor Hale was on his feet, shouting at his attorneys in whispers that carried anyway. Tyler and Marcus huddled together, looking terrified. The reporters were frantically typing, sensing blood in the water. 20 minutes later, the door opened and Judge Chen returned to the bench, looking like thunder. Park and Cross followed, Cross's face pale, Park's carefully neutral. Bailiff, bring back the jury. The jury returned looking confused. Judge Chen addressed them with barely contained anger. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been informed of evidence suggesting possible tampering with this trial. I'm declaring a mistrial effective immediately. The courtroom erupted. Chen gavelled for order. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney for Criminal Investigation. Ms. Mitchell, you're free to go. All charges are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. Sarah felt the words hit her but couldn't process them. Dismissed. Free. It was over. But Chen wasn't finished. He turned to where Victor Hale sat, his expression colder than Sarah had seen. Mr.
Haley?
You are ordered to remain in the jurisdiction pending investigation into allegations of witness intimidation, jury tampering, and obstruction of justice. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Hale understands he's not to leave the state. Victor shot to his feet. This is outrageous. I haven't done anything. You hired a private investigator to follow witnesses. You had tracking devices placed on Ms. Mitchell's vehicle. You attempted to contact 3 jury members through intermediaries offering financial incentives. Do not insult this court by claiming ignorance. Chen's voice could have cut steel. You thought your money put you above the law. You're about to learn how wrong you were. He gavelled once more. This court is adjourned. The gallery exploded into chaos, reporters rushing for doors, veterans erupting in cheers, Victor Hale screaming at his lawyers while his son sat pale and shaking. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, watching her life reassemble itself in real time. Park grabbed her shoulders. You're free. It's over. You won. How? What evidence? The investigator Hale hired to intimidate witnesses? He got nervous about criminal exposure and came forward. Gave us everything. Recordings of Hale ordering surveillance, financial records showing payments to people connected to jury members, emails discussing how to discredit you. He handed us Hale's entire operation on a silver platter. Williams appeared beside them, grinning wider than Sarah had ever seen. The DA is already drawing up charges. Hale's going to spend the next decade fighting to stay out of prison. Sarah looked across the courtroom to where Daniel Brooks stood on his crutches, tears streaming down his face, surrounded by Marines who were embracing him like family. When he caught her eye, he mouthed 2 words. Thank you. She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat. The next hours blurred together, Park handling paperwork, Williams coordinating the veteran exodus from the courthouse, reporters shouting questions Sarah didn't answer. She walked out into autumn sunlight feeling like she'd been holding her breath for a week and could finally exhale. But the story wasn't finished yet. 2 days later, Sarah received a call from the hospital. The administrator who'd suspended her wanted to meet. She walked into Graymont Memorial expecting either reinstatement or formal termination, not sure which would hurt more. Director Patricia Rhodes sat behind her desk, looking uncomfortable. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Am I fired? Rhodes had the decency to look ashamed. No, you're being reinstated with full back pay and a formal apology from the hospital board. We should never have suspended you without a full investigation. We reacted to pressure from the Hale family, and that was wrong. Sarah sat down slowly. Victor Hale pressured you. He threatened to pull his foundation's funding if we didn't distance ourselves from you. It's significant money, enough that the board felt they had no choice. Rhodes met her eyes. But after what came out in court, after seeing how he operates, we've decided that some money isn't worth taking. His foundation's donations are being returned. What about the staff shortage, the shifts I was covering? We've hired 3 new nurses and we're actively recruiting more. Your situation highlighted problems we'd been ignoring. Consider it a wake-up call. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. When do I start? Whenever you're ready. Take some time if you need it. You've earned it. Sarah stood. I'll see you Monday morning. She walked out of Rhodes' office feeling like she'd reclaimed another piece of her life. But there was still one more thing she needed to do. She found Daniel Brooks at the VA office, waiting for an appointment that would probably be delayed or canceled or rescheduled for the 4th time. He looked up when she entered and his face transformed with relief. They told me you got your job back, he said. Just now, you? Benefits are being fast-tracked. Apparently the publicity from the trial made some people nervous about how they've been treating veterans. He smiled, but it was edged with bitterness. Took a court case and national news coverage to get them to do their jobs. Sarah sat beside him. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. Don't be. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of people treating me like I'm less than human because I lost a leg serving my country. What you did, standing up for me, that mattered more than you know. You stood up too. You testified even when they tried to make you look unreliable. We stood up together. That's the point. Daniel shifted his weight, adjusting his prosthetic. The Marines have been checking on me. Williams set me up with a support group, people who actually understand. First time since my discharge, I feel like I'm not alone in this. Sarah felt tears prickle at her eyes. You were never alone. You just didn't know where your people were yet. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who'd been through hell and found each other on the other side. What happens to Hale? Daniel asked. Trial starts in 3 months. Federal charges for witness tampering, jury intimidation, obstruction of justice. His lawyers are already trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA isn't interested. They want to make an example. And his sons? Tyler and Marcus are facing civil suits from Robert Hendricks and 2 other former classmates who came forward after the trial. Their prep school expelled them. Princeton rescinded Tyler's admission. They're learning that actions have consequences. Daniel nodded slowly. Good. Maybe they'll become better people. Probably not, but maybe. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Park. Press conference in 1 hour. Your choice if you want to attend. She showed it to Daniel. They want me to do a press conference. Talk about what happened. Are you going to? Sarah thought about it. About standing in front of cameras, about becoming a symbol, about having her face associated with this story forever. About all the ways it could go wrong. Then she thought about Margaret Chen using her phone to record injustice. About Colonel Harrison flying across the country to vouch for her. About hundreds of veterans standing in formation outside a courthouse because one of their own needed backup. About the cost of silence. Yeah, she said. I think I am. The press conference was held on the courthouse steps, the same place Sarah had been arraigned a week ago. Now she stood behind a podium with Park on one side and Williams on the other, facing a sea of cameras and reporters who'd spent days turning her into a story and were now waiting to hear her voice. Park spoke first, giving a statement about justice and accountability, about how the case exposed systematic problems with wealth-buying influence. Then he stepped aside and Sarah approached the microphone. She'd prepared remarks, but looking out at the crowd, she decided to speak from the heart instead. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a nurse, a veteran, and someone who made a choice in a diner one morning that changed my life. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about trials or media attention or any of this. I just saw someone who needed help, and I helped him. She paused, gathering her thoughts. People keep asking if I regret it, if I'd do it differently knowing what would happen. The answer is no, because the alternative was standing by and doing nothing while someone got hurt. And I learned a long time ago that standing by makes you part of the problem. A reporter shouted a question, but Sarah kept talking. What happened in that courtroom wasn't about me. It was about whether we're going to keep letting people with money and power abuse people without either. It was about whether we value justice or just the appearance of justice. The jury never got to deliberate, but I think the answer came through anyway. She looked directly into the cameras. To everyone who supported me, the veterans who traveled here, the people who donated to help with legal fees, the witnesses who testified even when they were threatened, thank you. You showed me that standing up matters, that some things are worth fighting for, that we're stronger together than any of us are alone. Sarah stepped back from the microphone. Park fielded questions while she stood beside him, watching the circus unfold, feeling disconnected from it all. Because the real story wasn't what happened in that courtroom. It was what happened after. 3 weeks later, Sarah returned to her shift at Graymont Memorial. The ICU was still understaffed but improving, still chaotic but manageable. Her colleagues welcomed her back with hugs and relief, grateful to have an extra pair of hands, treating her like she'd never left. A patient coded on her second shift back. Elderly man, cardiac arrest, standard trauma protocol. Sarah worked through it with the same focused calm she'd always had, calling for medications and equipment, coordinating with the team, keeping her hands steady while everything around her was chaos. They got him back. Pulse stabilized, breathing restored, life saved. Afterward, washing blood off her hands in the scrub sink, Sarah caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired but solid, worn but not broken. The woman who'd walked into Riley's diner looking for coffee. The woman who'd stood up when everyone else sat down. The woman who'd paid the price and survived anyway. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Coffee tomorrow? My treat. Not Riley's, though. Sarah smiled and typed back, sounds perfect. She finished her shift, drove home through city streets that felt familiar again, climbed the stairs to her apartment that was finally just a home instead of a place she was hiding. Inside, she found a package waiting at her door. No return address. She opened it carefully and found a medal inside. A purple heart, old and worn, with a note written in precise military script. This belonged to my son. He died in Fallujah, saving his unit. I heard what you did and I thought he'd want you to have it. Some people are warriors no matter what uniform they wear. Thank you for proving that honor still exists. Margaret Harrison, Gold Star Mother. Sarah held the medal in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the history, the sacrifice it represented. She thought about setting it on a shelf, displaying it somewhere visible. Instead, she put it in a drawer with her own military decorations, closed it, and went to make dinner. Because the real honor wasn't in medals or recognition. It was in showing up every day and doing the work, in standing up when it mattered, in defending people who couldn't defend themselves, in being someone who, when the moment came, didn't look away. The next morning, Sarah met Daniel at a coffee shop across town. They sat by the window drinking terrible coffee and talking about nothing important, sports, weather, plans for the weekend. Normal conversation between two people who'd been through something extraordinary and were learning how to be ordinary again. I'm starting physical therapy next week, Daniel said. Real therapy, not the VA runaround.
Williams connected me with a program that specializes in veterans. They think I might be able to get fitted for a better prosthetic, something that'll let me walk without crutches eventually. That's great, Sarah said, and meant it. I'm also starting school, community college, just part-time while I figure out what I want to do, but it's something. You'll be good at whatever you choose, Daniel smiled. Says the woman who took down 2 teenagers and a corrupt real estate developer in the same week. I didn't take down anyone. I just didn't back down. Sometimes that's the same thing. They finished their coffee and walked out into morning sunlight that felt warmer than it had in weeks. The city moved around them, people going to work and school and appointments, living their lives, most of them unaware of what had happened in that courthouse, what it meant. But some people knew. Some people had seen. And those people would remember.
As Sarah drove to work, she passed Riley's diner. There was a new sign in the window. Under new management, grand reopening next month. She'd heard that Mike the counterman had bought the place from the previous owner who'd decided to retire, that he'd renamed it Victory Diner and planned to offer discounts to veterans and first responders, that he'd hung Margaret Chen's photograph in a place of honor behind the counter with a plaque that read, "Courage comes in many forms." Sarah didn't stop. She had a shift to get to, patients to treat, lives to save. But she smiled as she drove past, knowing that some victories last longer than others, and that sometimes standing up in a diner on a Tuesday morning can change more than just one life. It can change what people believe is possible. Part 5. Viết tiếp câu chuyện liền mạch ngay từ câu cuối. Part 4. Không recap, không giỏi. The weeks that followed moved with the strange momentum of life reassembling itself after an explosion, pieces clicking back into place, some fitting better than before, others revealing gaps that would never quite close. Sarah worked her shifts at Graymont Memorial, finding rhythm in the familiar chaos of the ICU, in the beeping monitors and urgent voices, and the satisfaction of saving lives that hung in the balance. But something had changed in how people looked at her, how they moved around her, a new awareness that she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. Or the uncomfortable realization that the quiet nurse who worked double shifts had steel in her spine that most people never found. 3 months after the mistrial, Victor Hale's federal trial began. Sarah didn't attend. She'd spent enough time in courtrooms, had given enough of her life to that particular fight. But she followed the coverage, watched the news segments showing Hale in a suit that cost more than her car, flanked by lawyers who couldn't save him from the evidence his own investigator had provided. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison and a $2 million fine. No plea deal. No reduced sentence for cooperation, just consequences, delivered with the cold precision of a justice system that finally remembered it was supposed to be blind. Sarah was restocking supplies in the ICU when Park called with the verdict. She stepped into the supply closet for privacy, listening to him describe how Hale's face had collapsed when the sentence was read, how his lawyers had immediately filed appeals that everyone knew would fail. "It's over," Park said. "He's done. His real estate empire is collapsing. Investors are pulling out. Banks are calling loans. The whole thing's imploding. Tyler and Marcus settled their civil suits for undisclosed amounts, but word is it cleaned out their trust funds. The Hale family is finished." Sarah sat down on a box of IV supplies, processing it. "What happens to Tyler and Marcus?" "Last I heard, they're both working minimum wage jobs and living in a studio apartment their mother rented for them. She divorced Victor 2 months ago, took half of whatever was left. The boys are learning what life looks like when daddy's money can't fix your problems." "Think they'll learn anything from it?" Park was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Some people break when they hit bottom. Some people rebuild. We'll see which kind they are." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the supply closet for a few more minutes, letting the news settle into her bones. Justice had been served. The bully had fallen. The system had worked, eventually, imperfectly, but it had worked. So why did she still feel hollow? She returned to her shift and threw herself into work. 2 codes, 3 admissions, a family conference about end-of-life care that left everyone crying. By the time her shift ended at 7 a.m., she was too exhausted to think about Hale or trials or any of it. She drove home on autopilot, climbed her stairs, and found Daniel waiting outside her door with coffee and a newspaper. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, handing her the paper. The headline read, "Hale sentenced to 6 years." Below it was a photo of Victor being led from the courthouse in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. The article detailed his crimes, his fall, the spectacular implosion of everything he'd built on a foundation of money and intimidation. Sarah scanned it, then folded the paper and handed it back. "I already heard. How do you feel?" She thought about that while unlocking her door, gesturing for Daniel to follow her inside. How did she feel? Victorious? Vindicated? Satisfied? "Tired," she said finally. "Just really tired." Daniel settled onto her couch, balancing his prosthetic leg with practiced ease. He'd gotten the new one 3 weeks ago, a high-tech carbon fiber model that let him walk without crutches, though he still carried a cane for stability. He looked different now, Sarah thought. Less hunted, more present. "Williams called me last night," Daniel said. "He's organizing something for next month, a veterans fundraiser at the hospital. They want to honor you and raise money for VA programs." Sarah shook her head. "I don't want to be honored. She did know." Sergeant Major Williams had become a fixture in both their lives over the past months, checking in regularly, connecting them with resources, building a network of support that neither of them had known existed. He was planning something big for the fundraiser, involving every veteran group in 3 states, and he'd made it clear that Sarah's attendance was not optional. "When is it?" she asked. "Second Saturday next month, black tie event, hospital's main conference center, 500 expected attendees." "I don't own anything black tie." "Then buy something, or rent it, or show up in scrubs." "I don't think Williams cares as long as you're there." Sarah poured herself coffee and stood at her kitchen window, watching the city wake up below. "Did you read the part about Tyler and Marcus?" "Yeah, minimum wage jobs. Studio apartment. Probably the first time in their lives they've had to actually work for anything." "You think they hate us?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Probably. But I don't care anymore. They don't get to live rent-free in my head. They don't get any more of my time or my energy or my peace. They're just 2 kids learning a lesson they should have learned years ago." Sarah turned to look at him. "When did you get so wise?" "Therapy. Lots of therapy. Turns out talking about your problems with a professional is more effective than drinking them away in your apartment." He smiled slightly. "Who knew?" They sat in comfortable silence while the morning light strengthened, 2 people who'd survived something most people couldn't imagine, finding their way back to normal one conversation at a time. The fundraiser came faster than Sarah expected, arriving with the kind of organized chaos that Williams orchestrated like a military campaign. The hospital's conference center was transformed into something out of a magazine: round tables with white linens, centerpieces made of American flags and flowers, a stage with a podium, and massive screens showing photos from various deployments. Sarah arrived in a simple black dress she'd bought specifically for this, feeling underdressed despite Park's assurance that she looked fine. The room was already half full: veterans in dress uniforms, hospital staff in formal wear, local politicians and business leaders who'd paid substantial amounts for the privilege of attending. Williams materialized at her elbow like he'd been waiting. "You clean up nice, Mitchell. Don't get used to it. This is a one-time thing." "We'll see about that." He guided her toward the head table where Colonel Harrison sat in full dress blues, looking like a recruiting poster. The colonel wanted to say hello. Harrison stood when Sarah approached, offering his hand with genuine warmth. "Ms. Mitchell, it's good to see you in better circumstances than a courtroom." "You too, sir. Thank you for coming." "Wouldn't have missed it. This event is raising serious money. Last count, we're at $400,000 for VA programs. Your story inspired a lot of people to open their wallets." Sarah felt her face flush. "It's not my story. It's Daniel's story. He's the one who served, who sacrificed. You both served. You both sacrificed. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." Harrison gestured to a chair. "Sit. The program starts in 20 minutes and Williams has a whole presentation plan that I suspect will make you very uncomfortable." He was right about that. The program opened with the national anthem, followed by a color guard posting flags, followed by Williams taking the podium to talk about veteran support programs and the importance of community. Then the lights dimmed and a video started playing on the screens. Sarah recognized the footage immediately. Margaret Chen's video from the diner, edited together with news coverage of the trial, interviews with people who'd been in the courtroom, photos of the veteran formations outside the courthouse. It was her story told in images and sound bites, turned into something larger than the individual moments. The video ended with a photo of Sarah in her army uniform, young and unsmiling, holding a rifle in some desert that could have been anywhere. Text appeared on screen. "Some people stand up when everyone else sits down." The room erupted in applause. Sarah wanted to disappear through the floor. Williams returned to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman we're here to honor tonight, Sarah Mitchell." The applause intensified. People were standing. Sarah walked to the podium on legs that felt like water, her hands shaking as she gripped the edges. "I'm not really sure what to say," she began, and her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I'm not comfortable being called a hero. I just did what I thought was right in the moment. What anyone should have done." She looked out at the crowd. Hundreds of faces watching her, waiting for wisdom or inspiration or something she wasn't sure she could provide. The real heroes are the people who serve every day without recognition. The nurses working double shifts because we're understaffed. The veterans struggling with injuries and PTSD and a system that doesn't always work the way it should. The people who stand up for others, even when it costs them everything. Sarah's eyes found Daniel in the crowd, sitting at a table with other disabled veterans, all of them in uniform, all of them watching her with expressions she couldn't quite read. What happened at that diner wasn't about me being brave. It was about Corporal Daniel Brooks deserving dignity and not getting it from anyone except the people who put him in that situation in the first place. It was about a system that lets bullies operate with impunity as long as they have enough money. It was about all of us being tired of watching injustice happen and doing nothing. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The trial is over. Victor Hale is in prison. His sons are learning consequences for the first time in their lives. That's justice, I guess. But justice doesn't fix everything. It doesn't give Daniel his leg back. It doesn't erase the trauma. It just stops the bleeding. And then we all have to figure out how to heal. Sarah looked at Williams, at Harrison, at Park sitting near the back, looking proud. The money we're raising tonight will help veterans get the support they need. That matters more than any trial verdict. That's the real work, showing up every day, helping each other, building something better than what we inherited. She stepped back from the podium. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And thank you for proving that some battles are worth fighting, even when you're not sure you can win. The applause was deafening. Sarah returned to her seat, her hands still shaking, and Harrison leaned over to whisper, "Well done." The rest of the evening blurred together. Dinner that Sarah barely tasted, speeches from politicians praising veteran service, an auction for various donated items that raised another $100,000. By the time the formal program ended and people started mingling, Sarah was exhausted and ready to leave. But Williams appeared at her elbow again, this time with a woman Sarah didn't recognize. Mid-50s, professional demeanor, carrying herself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. Sarah Mitchell, this is Dr. Angela Foster. She runs the trauma psychology program at University Medical Center. Dr. Foster offered her hand. Ms. Mitchell, I've been following your story with great interest. I wonder if you'd be willing to meet with me sometime to discuss a potential opportunity. What kind of opportunity? We're developing a training program for healthcare workers on de-escalation and crisis intervention, particularly for situations involving trauma patients or people experiencing mental health crises. Your military background combined with your nursing experience makes you uniquely qualified to help develop curriculum. Sarah blinked. I'm not a psychologist. No, but you're someone who's managed high-stress situations with remarkable composure. We could use that expertise. Foster pulled out a business card. Think about it. Call me when you're ready to discuss details. She disappeared into the crowd, leaving Sarah holding the card and staring at Williams. Did you set that up? I may have mentioned to some people that you might be looking for ways to expand your impact beyond bedside nursing. Foster reached out on her own. Williams smiled slightly. You've got options now, Mitchell. People are paying attention. What you do with that is up to you. Later, after the event wound down and most people had left, Sarah found Daniel outside the conference center, leaning against the railing overlooking the hospital's courtyard. The night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Hell of an evening, Daniel said. Hell of a few months. Sarah joined him at the railing. Foster offered me a job. Training program for healthcare workers. You going to take it? I don't know. Part of me just wants to go back to the ICU and forget any of this happened. Be normal again. Daniel laughed softly. We were never normal. Normal people don't survive what we survived. Normal people don't stand up to bullies with rich dads. We're something else now. Might as well figure out what that means. Sarah looked at him. This man she'd defended on impulse, who'd become one of her closest friends, who understood things about her that most people never would. What does it mean for you? I'm enrolling in social work school next semester, full-time, going to focus on veteran services, help people navigate the system that tried to chew me up. Figure if I went through it, I might as well use the experience to help others avoid the worst of it. That's amazing, Daniel. It's necessary. There are too many people falling through cracks, too many veterans getting lost in bureaucracy, too many Daniel Brookses sitting in VA waiting rooms hoping someone will care enough to help. He turned to face her fully. You saved my life in that diner. Not from those boys. From what I was becoming. Someone invisible. Someone who'd accepted being treated like garbage because that was easier than fighting. His voice roughened with emotion. You showed me I was still worth defending. That changed everything. So whatever you decide to do next, ICU, training program, something else entirely, just know that you already made a difference. You already mattered. Everything else is just bonus. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes and didn't try to hide them. I was so scared. During the trial, during everything, I thought my life was over. It was over. The old life, the one where you just survived and didn't rock the boat, that life died in that diner. Daniel smiled. But new lives can be better than old ones, if you let them. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, two people who'd walked through fire and come out changed but not destroyed. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Chen. Saw you on the news tonight. Made me proud. Keep fighting the good fight. Margaret. Then another from Park. You did great. Let me know if you want to discuss that training program opportunity. Happy to review contracts. And another from a number she didn't recognize. This is Tyler Hale. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I'm trying to be better. No excuses. Just sorry. Sarah stared at that last message for a long time. Part of her wanted to delete it, to refuse forgiveness, to hold on to the anger that had sustained her through the worst of it. But another part, the part that had knelt beside Daniel and asked if he was hurt, the part that had defended him even knowing the cost, that part whispered that holding grudges was just another way of staying trapped. She typed back, "Apology noted. Make sure your actions match your words." Then she deleted the conversation and put her phone away. "What was that?" Daniel asked. "Tyler. Apologizing." "You believe him?" "Doesn't matter if I believe him. What matters is whether he believes himself enough to actually change. That's between him and whoever he looks at in the mirror." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's generous of you." "It's not generous, it's self-preservation. I don't want to spend the rest of my life carrying anger for people who aren't worth the energy." Sarah pushed off the railing. "Come on. I'll buy you coffee. Somewhere that's not Riley's." They walked through the hospital corridors, past the ICU where Sarah would return to work in 2 days, past the emergency department where ambulances were already unloading patients, past the memorial wall with names of staff who had died serving others. The hospital hummed with the constant activity of lives being saved and lost and saved again, the eternal rhythm of healing. Outside, the night air was crisp and clean. They found a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. Not Riley's, never Riley's again, but a similar kind of place where working people got coffee at midnight and breakfast at 3 a.m. The waitress brought menus and coffee without asking, and Daniel added too much sugar while Sarah drank hers black. They ordered food they didn't need and talked about nothing important: sports, weather, Daniel's classes, Sarah's shift schedule, normal conversation, normal life. Except nothing would ever be truly normal again, and Sarah was starting to realize that might be okay. A week later, Sarah called Dr. Foster and accepted the position developing crisis intervention training. She'd work part-time at the ICU and part-time creating curriculum, combining her medical expertise with her military experience to teach healthcare workers how to de-escalate volatile situations without violence. It felt right in a way she hadn't expected, taking the worst experience of her life and turning it into something useful, something that might prevent other people from facing similar situations. Her first training session was scheduled for 6 weeks out. She spent the intervening time developing materials, interviewing veterans and nurses about their experiences, building a program that balanced safety with compassion, authority with empathy. The night before the first session, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was qualified for this, if anyone would take her seriously, if she was just fooling herself into thinking she had something valuable to teach. Her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. A text from Williams. "Can't sleep before a big operation? Neither could I. You're ready. Trust your training. Make us proud." Williams. Somehow, he always knew. Sarah showed up to the training session in professional clothes, carrying materials she'd organized and reorganized a dozen times, ready to face a room of skeptical healthcare workers who probably thought they didn't need some nurse teaching them how to do their jobs. Instead, she found 30 people, nurses, doctors, EMTs, security staff, who'd specifically requested this training after hearing about her case. They listened intently as she walked through scenarios, demonstrated techniques, shared stories from both her military service and her nursing career. By the end of the 4-hour session, 3 people had asked about scheduling follow-up training for their departments. 2 others wanted to discuss developing specialized programs for their facilities. Dr. Foster appeared as everyone was leaving, looking pleased. "That was excellent, Sarah. Clear, practical, based on real experience. Exactly what we needed." "It felt good," Sarah admitted. "Teaching people, sharing what I've learned, better than I expected." "We'd like you to increase your schedule, 2 sessions per week instead of 1. Different hospitals, different departments. We have a waiting list of facilities requesting this training." Sarah thought about her ICU shifts, her hard-won return to normalcy, the life she'd been trying to rebuild. Then she thought about all the situations she'd witnessed where healthcare workers froze or escalated because they didn't know what else to do, where patients got hurt because the staff weren't equipped to handle crisis. 3 sessions per week, she said, but I keep my ICU shifts. I need to stay grounded in patient care or I'm just teaching theory. Foster smiled. Deal. Over the following months, Sarah's life settled into a new rhythm. ICU shifts where she did the work she'd always done. Training sessions where she taught others to handle chaos with composure. Evenings spent refining curriculum and developing new programs. She was busier than ever, but it felt purposeful in a way her old life hadn't. Daniel graduated from community college and enrolled in the university's social work program. Williams retired from active duty and started a nonprofit connecting veterans with resources. Margaret Chen became a regular speaker at veteran events, telling her story about why she'd recorded that video and encouraging others to stand up when they witnessed injustice. The diner reopened as Victory Diner with Mike as owner, and it became an unofficial gathering place for veterans and first responders. Sarah went there occasionally, always sitting in a different booth than before, always ordering coffee and toast, always leaving a generous tip. 6 months after the fundraiser, Sarah received a letter from the state nursing board. Inside was a certificate of commendation for exemplary conduct in the defense of patient dignity and public safety. It was signed by the board president and came with a formal apology for the initial suspension. She hung it on her wall next to her military commendations and her nursing license, a reminder that sometimes the system worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it worked. A year after the incident, Sarah was invited to speak at a national nursing conference about crisis de-escalation. She stood on a stage in front of 3,000 nurses from across the country and told her story, not the dramatic version from news coverage, but the real version, with all the fear and uncertainty and doubt. "I didn't have a plan when I stood up in that diner," she said. "I didn't think about consequences or trials or any of this. I just knew that if I stayed seated, if I stayed silent, I'd have to live with that choice forever. And I'd already made too many compromises, stayed quiet too many times, let things happen that shouldn't have happened." She looked out at the sea of faces. We see injustice every day in healthcare. Patients mistreated because of their insurance or lack thereof. People suffering because they can't afford medication. Families destroyed by medical debt. And most of the time we feel powerless to change it. But power isn't just about money or position. Sometimes power is just refusing to accept the unacceptable. Sarah paused, letting that settle. "I'm not telling you to assault people in diners. I'm telling you that silence is a choice, and choosing to speak up, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, that's also a choice. You get to decide which person you are." The applause was immediate and sustained. After the session, dozens of nurses approached her with their own stories of standing up, staying quiet, wrestling with the same choices she'd faced. One young nurse, maybe 25, waited until everyone else had left. "I watched your trial on TV. It inspired me to report a doctor who was abusing patients. He got suspended. I got transferred to a different department, but it was worth it." "Was it hard?" Sarah asked. "Terrifying. I almost didn't do it. But then I thought about you standing up to those boys and their rich father, and I figured if you could do that, I could file a report." The young nurse smiled. "So thank you for showing us it's possible." After she left, Sarah sat in the empty conference room, processing the conversation. Somewhere along the way, without intending to, she'd become a symbol. People saw her story and found courage in it. That responsibility felt heavy and humbling and strangely right. Her phone rang. Park's number. "Just got some news you'll want to hear," he said without preamble. "Victor Hale's appeals were denied. All of them. He's serving the full 6 years with no possibility of early release." Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but closure. "How's he handling it?" "Poorly. According to my sources, turns out prison is less pleasant when you can't buy your way to better conditions. He's in general population, doing laundry detail, eating the same food as everyone else." Park paused. "Justice isn't always pretty, but sometimes it's appropriate." "What about Tyler and Marcus?" "Both enrolled in community college, working part-time jobs. Tyler's apparently been going to therapy, trying to understand why he became the person he became. Marcus is less introspective, but they're both learning to live without daddy's money, which is probably the best education they could get." After they hung up, Sarah sat with the news, letting it integrate into the narrative of her life. The villain had fallen. The system had worked. Justice had prevailed. But the real victory wasn't Hale in prison or his sons learning consequences. The real victory was Daniel walking without crutches, pursuing a career helping others. It was the training program reaching thousands of healthcare workers. It was Margaret Chen speaking out about the importance of witnessing. It was all the small ways their story had rippled out into the world, creating change that had nothing to do with courtrooms or verdicts. That evening, Sarah met Daniel at Victory Diner. Mike had reserved their usual booth and brought coffee without asking, along with pie that Sarah suspected wasn't on the menu. "On the house," Mike said, "for making my diner famous." "We made it infamous," Daniel corrected. "Famous, infamous. Either way, business is up 40%, and I get to tell the story to every new customer. I'll take it." He left them alone with their coffee and pie. Daniel added his usual excessive sugar while Sarah cut into her slice. Apple, still warm, probably made that afternoon. "Heard about Hale's appeals," Daniel said. "Park called. 6 years, no early release. How do you feel?" Sarah considered that while chewing pie. "Neutral? I wanted consequences." He got consequences, but it doesn't change anything that already happened. It just stops him from doing it to other people, which is good. But it doesn't feel like victory. It just feels like the bleeding stopped. "That's what justice is," Daniel said quietly. "It doesn't fix things. It just stops the damage and gives you space to heal." They ate in comfortable silence, watching the diner fill with the dinner crowd, workers stopping for coffee, families having early dinners, the diverse cross-section of humanity that populated Mike's establishment. Sarah thought about the life she'd built over the past year, the ICU work that grounded her, the training program that challenged her, the relationship she'd formed with Daniel and Williams and Margaret, and all the others who'd become her unlikely family. She thought about Tyler's apology text and whether he'd actually become a better person or just learned to fake it convincingly. She thought about the young nurse at the conference who'd found courage in Sarah's story. She thought about all the ways one moment in a diner had cascaded into a year of transformation. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked, as if reading her mind. "Standing up that day? Starting this whole chain of events?" Sarah didn't have to think about her answer. "No. Even at the worst of it, when I thought I'd lose everything, I never regretted defending you. I just regretted that defending you was necessary, that the world works in a way where bullies can operate until someone stops them. We stopped them. We did, and maybe that matters more than I thought it would." Daniel raised his coffee cup. "To stopping bullies." Sarah clinked her cup against his. "To standing up when everyone else sits down." They finished their pie and coffee, talking about Daniel's upcoming semester and Sarah's next training session and Mike's plan to expand the diner into the empty storefront next door. Normal conversation about normal life, except they both knew there was nothing normal about what they'd survived or who they'd become. When they left, the evening had turned cool and clear, stars visible between the city lights. Sarah walked Daniel to his car. He drove now, had passed the test on his third try, was proud of the independence it represented. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Wouldn't miss it." She watched him drive away, then walked to her own car, taking the long route through the parking lot, not hurrying. Her phone buzzed with a text from Williams. "Breakfast tomorrow? Important nonprofit business to discuss." Which meant he wanted to recruit her for another project, another cause, another battle worth fighting. Sarah smiled and typed back, 7 a.m., usual place. Because she'd learned something over the past year, something that felt true in a way few things did. Standing up once didn't mean you were done. It meant you'd found your feet. And once you knew you could stand, sitting down became harder. She drove home through familiar streets, past the hospital where she worked, past the courthouse where she'd been tried and freed, past all the landmarks of a year that had destroyed her old life and built something stronger in its place. Her apartment was dark and quiet when she arrived. She turned on lights, made tea. She wouldn't drink, stood at her window watching the city lights spread out below like stars brought down to earth. On her refrigerator, held by magnets, were photos. Daniel graduating from community college, Margaret speaking at a veteran event, Williams with his nonprofit board, the nursing conference where Sarah had given her keynote, a collage of moments that proved the story didn't end with a verdict or a prison sentence. It ended with people finding purpose in survival, with wounds becoming wisdom, with victims becoming advocates. Sarah picked up Dr. Foster's business card, still sitting on her counter after all these months. On the back, Foster had written a quote, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the judgment that something else is more important." Sarah had never asked what Foster meant by leaving that quote. But she understood it now, in a way she couldn't have a year ago. She'd been terrified in that diner, terrified during the trial, terrified standing in front of 3,000 nurses sharing her story. The fear hadn't gone away. But neither had the conviction that some things mattered more than fear, that Daniel Brooks deserved dignity, that bullies needed consequences, that silence was complicity, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they just refused to look away. Sarah set down the card and looked at her reflection in the dark window. She looked older than she had a year ago, more worn but also more solid, less like someone who'd been broken and more like someone who'd been tested and passed. Her phone buzzed one more time, an email from the nursing board about a new committee forming to address workplace violence in healthcare settings. They wanted her expertise, her perspective, her voice. Sarah opened her laptop and started typing a response. Because the work was never done. The bullies would keep coming, the systems would keep failing, the injustices would keep happening. But now she knew what standing up looked like. And she knew she wasn't standing alone. Somewhere across the city, Daniel was studying social work materials, preparing to help the next generation of veterans navigate bureaucracy. Williams was drafting grant proposals for his nonprofit. Margaret was organizing another speaking event. Mike was planning his diner expansion, all of them moving forward, building something better than what they'd inherited, refusing to accept that the world had to stay broken just because it had always been broken. Sarah finished her email and hit send. Then she made actual tea instead of just thinking about it, sat at her small kitchen table, and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She'd been knocked down in a diner. She'd stood back up. And in the process, she'd learned that standing up wasn't a single act. It was a practice, a discipline, a choice you made over and over again. Tomorrow, she'd go to the ICU and save lives. Next week, she'd teach healthcare workers how to handle crisis. Next month, she'd speak at another conference, train another cohort, help another person find their courage. But tonight, she just sat with her tea and her memories and her hard-won peace, letting herself be someone who'd survived and thrived and refused to be diminished by the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Outside her window, the city hummed with a million stories, some ending, some beginning, some still being written. Sarah's story had been written in blood and fear and courage, in courtroom testimony and veteran formations, in coffee shared with an unlikely friend who'd become family. It wasn't the story she'd planned, it wasn't the life she'd expected, but it was hers. And she'd earned every scar, every lesson, every moment of it. Sarah raised her teacup to her reflection in the dark glass, a solitary toast to survival and strength and the stubborn refusal to stay down when the world tried to knock you flat. To standing up, she whispered. And somewhere in the night, in diners and hospitals and courtrooms and all the places where ordinary people made extraordinary choices, the words echoed like a promise that would never quite fade. Some people stand up when everyone else sits down. And sometimes that makes all the difference in the world.